Long before cities rose from riverbanks and long before myths learned to speak through the mouths of storytellers, there might have been a people who looked up at a sky far different from ours. Not a gentle dome, not a steady pattern of constellations, but a shifting firmament wrapped around a planet that wandered on a path stretching much farther than any world in our familiar system. Nibiru, as the ancient tablets described it, wasn't just another point of light. It was a place with a long sweeping orbit that carried it toward and away from the sun like a distant pilgrim, following a path too old for memory. If humanity began there, then our first home was one defined by motion, isolation and patience on a scale we rarely consider today. Imagine that world for a moment without drifting into metaphor or dream. A place shaped by cycles far longer than seasons, where a single year could outlast generations. A world where its people would have grown accustomed to long periods of cold and long stretches of distant warmth, adapting not only their bodies but their thinking to the slow turning of cosmic rhythms. Life on such a planet would require an awareness of time and distance different from anything Earth would later teach. Generations might pass before the skies brightened enough to hint at a nearness to the sun. Entire family lines might be born in the deep quiet of the far reaches, learning to live under a sky where daylight was a pale visitor rather than a constant presence. If the people of that world eventually looked outward, wondering whether other places held better chances for survival, it wouldn't be a sudden decision. Their history itself would be shaped by patience. A civilization accustomed to waiting would understand the value of planning far ahead, of building with durability, of trusting that although their lives moved at a slow pace, their ideas could outlive their bodies. They would think in spans broader than lifetimes, placing effort into works that only their descendants would complete. That mindset alone might have set the foundation for long journeys across the void. The idea that humanity might have come from such a people is startling, yet the ancient tablets speak often of knowledge carried between worlds, of beings who travelled in ships that shone like metal and fire, of teachers who arrived already grown, not born. Texts like these might easily be dismissed as stories or embellishments, but they share an unusual consistency. Cultures separated by oceans and mountains carried echoes of the same story, that our ancestors did not begin here, that the earliest humans were shaped, guided, or even delivered by those who came from above. If Nibiru was real and if its people were capable of crossing space, then the act of migration might have been both necessity and heritage. A wandering planet is vulnerable. A world that periodically drifts toward colder reaches would face challenges far different from Earth. Food sources, climates, and stability would shift in long cycles. Civilizations built on Nibiru would have learned early that survival required preparation for extremes. They would have mastered the control of energy, the conservation of resources, and the building of systems capable of functioning even during extended periods of cold and scarcity. Over time, those skills could evolve into technologies capable of searching for new worlds. But the question isn't about whether they could travel. It's about why they would choose Earth, not through a romantic lens or in abstract patterns, but through practical observation. Earth had warmth, stability, water in abundance, and a balance of conditions that allowed life to grow quickly. Compared to a world on an extreme orbit, it would appear almost peaceful, the sort of place where seeds could thrive without waiting through centuries of cold. For a civilization thinking in long arcs of time, Earth might have looked like an ideal sanctuary for a branch of their people, not as conquerors or overseers, but as participants in the unfolding life of a stable world. If the first humans were carried here, the transition wouldn't be sudden or chaotic. A group of settlers, carefully chosen, perhaps trained for adaptability, would arrive prepared to face an unfamiliar environment. They would understand the need to work with what they found, to anchor themselves to a planet with cycles dramatically shorter than their own. A year on Earth would pass in what felt like a moment compared to the vast rhythms of their home. They would have to adjust quickly, learning the pace of sunlight, the rapid changes of seasons, and the presence of life that had evolved independently here long before their arrival. They would stand on soil that held heat in ways their cold world rarely did. They would breathe air rich with oxygen, feel rainstorms move overhead in a single afternoon rather than over long months, watch plants grow at speeds unfamiliar to them. Everything here would feel fast, not too fast to endure, but fast enough to reshape their understanding of time, and within a few generations that speed would become natural, and the memory of their long-orbiting homeland would fade, softened by repetition, diluted by distance. The earliest stories of humanity might come from that process of forgetting, when knowledge becomes legend, when legend becomes symbolism, when symbolism becomes myth. A people who once knew exactly where they came from might eventually struggle to describe the truth. They would reach for the sky, pointing upward when recalling their origins. They might speak of gods descending in radiant vehicles, of beings who shaped them, of teachers who guided them before leaving. Not because they were inventing fantasies, but because the details had slipped into memory's softer spaces. Each telling would stretch a little, compress a little, and shift, until all that remained was the essential core. We came from the sky. Archaeological records from early human settlements show sudden leaps rather than smooth progress. The emergence of structured language, artistic expression, and organized societies appears faster than evolution alone might suggest. If settlers from a distant world carried knowledge with them, even in fragments, their descendants might have held an early advantage. Perhaps not the technologies of stars, but the clarity of thought, built from generations of studying a wandering world. That clarity could manifest in the observation of seasons, the tracking of stars, the early development of tools shaped with precision beyond what their environment might have taught naturally. And still, even while adjusting to Earth, they would hold on to pieces of their origins. They might build structures aligned with the sky, not for worship but for orientation. They might draw maps of constellations that meant little to Earth's climate, but everything to the memory of their ancestors. They might create symbols representing a long orbit, a crossing path, or a distant return. Those motifs appear repeatedly in early human cultures. Spirals, intersecting lines, pathways across the heavens. They could be art, or they could be remnants of a memory far older than any civilization recorded on clay. Over generations, the settlers' bodies would adapt to Earth's gravity, atmosphere, and nourishment. Evolution worked steadily, and within enough time their descendants would be indistinguishable from any species that had always been here. Their bones would show the same densities, their genetics would blend with local life in subtle ways, and their appearance would reflect the conditions of this world. They would become human as we know the term, shaped by Earth yet rooted in something older. The transformation wouldn't erase their history, it would simply make it harder to recognize. Stories would persist though. A teacher from the sky, a visitor bringing knowledge, a god who arrived in fire. These stories echo across continents, carried by people who never met. The similarity is not proof by itself, but it is a thread worth noticing. A thread that might stretch all the way back to a people who stepped off a vessel into a new world, breathing air that felt too rich, seeing colours that felt too bright, hearing the hum of an environment filled with a speed of life they were only beginning to understand. If they left anything behind that could point back to Nibiru, it wouldn't necessarily be machines or cities. Those might not survive the weathering of ages. What endures are stories, symbols, patterns of thought, and the subtle fingerprints of ancestry written into myths. Earth's first cultures often spoke of being placed here rather than emerging here. They described being shaped, taught, or guided. They attributed knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, to visitors who arrived already knowing the answers. Those narratives might not be literal accounts. They might be memories passed down so many times that they acquire the tone of fable. But fable or not, they suggest a tension between Earth as a home and Earth as an adopted place. They hint at a beginning that didn't start in the soil beneath us, but in the quiet far reaches of a world that drifted through space with a long, patient orbit. And as these echoes carried forward into later eras, they shaped cultures without those cultures realizing it. People built monuments aligned with stars they couldn't see. They created calendars that tracked cycles unrelated to Earth's movements. They spoke of returns, crossings, and the belief that one day the beings from the sky would come back. A memory doesn't need precision to persist. It only needs weight, repetition, and meaning. The journey from Nibiru to Earth, if it happened, would not have been a single event. It would be the beginning of a slow unfolding, one that blended migration with adaptation, memory with reinvention, a process where a people far from home gradually became the people of this world, carrying with them the quiet traces of a past written under a different sky. And as the generations continued, those traces softened, absorbed by Earth's own stories, until they lived mostly in the spaces between myths, waiting for someone to notice that the oldest tales share the same simple idea, that we came from above, not below. And from that first whisper of a journey, the story continues into how such a crossing might have unfolded, stretching from a wandering world into the open cradle of Earth. If the earliest humans truly came from a distant world like Nibiru, the question that naturally follows is not why they left, but how they made that journey across a cold stretch of space that most civilizations would struggle even to measure. The distance alone would test the limits of any technology, any patience, any planning. Yet, if Nibiru's people learned to thrive on a world whose orbit carried it far beyond the warmth of the familiar planets, then the idea of travelling through darkness wouldn't have seemed impossible. It might have seemed practical, even necessary, shaped by the harsh realities of a life lived at the edge of the sun's influence. A civilization built on a planet with a long orbital path would develop an understanding of the void long before most societies on Earth ever looked up and wondered what lay beyond the stars. They wouldn't see space as an obstacle. They would see it as the environment that shaped their world. The long winters, lasting for generations, would drive innovation toward ways of storing energy and preserving materials, making scarcity a lesson always present in their minds. They would design their cities, their tools, and their thinking around durability, not convenience. When a civilization is forced to prepare for decades of cold, it doesn't dream small. It doesn't rush. It builds with a quiet discipline. If such a people turned their gaze outward, they would understand that their survival depended on moving beyond their wandering orbit. A planet that swings between warmth and distant cold cannot rely solely on chance. It needs a plan, a long view, a strategy that goes far beyond the immediate horizon. Generations of scientists and navigators might have charted the layers of space surrounding their world, studying the patterns of stars to determine the safest routes. They would learn that the darkness was not empty but filled with energy fields, radiation belts, gravitational influences, and pockets of stability. Over enough time, they would map these unseen structures as confidently as early humans mapped rivers and mountains. The development of spacecraft for such a civilization wouldn't be sudden. It would grow piece by piece, shaped by centuries of trial and error. The earliest vessels might not have been built for migration. They might have been for observation, for studying the changes in their planet's atmosphere, or for reaching orbital platforms that tracked patterns invisible from the ground. What begins as observation often becomes ambition. Once they learn to operate above their sky, the next step would be learning to stay there. Stable stations, positioned to catch solar energy more efficiently, could have served as outposts during their planet's colder years. From these outposts, they might have found the confidence to go farther. A society accustomed to cycles of scarcity would discover quickly that storing fuel for long voyages required more than simple reserves. They would need materials that could endure centuries without breaking down, power sources that didn't require frequent replacement, and vessels capable of holding atmosphere and temperature regardless of what lay outside. The cold of deep space would not intimidate them. They lived with cold as a natural part of their existence. Their technologies would aim to control it, redirect it, or use it to their advantage. If they reached a point where interplanetary travel was possible, then interstellar, or at least intersystem, travel might not be far behind. Not because they were reckless, but because the logic of their world encouraged long-term solutions. Earth, when seen from afar, would appear as a stable haven compared to the shifting nature of their orbit. The warmth alone would be appealing. The consistent cycles, the predictable seasons, the abundance of liquid water, and an atmosphere balanced enough to support life without the need for constant adjustments, would make Earth a remarkable candidate for settlement. Planning such a journey would require collaboration on a scale difficult for Earth's early civilizations to imagine. Thousands of individuals might contribute to the engineering, the mathematics, the biological research, and the social planning needed for migration. It wouldn't just be about getting there. It would be about ensuring that once they arrived, their people could live without relying on Nibiru's distant technology. That meant choosing who would travel, preparing them physically and mentally, and giving them knowledge not only of the journey, but of the life awaiting them on Earth. The vessels themselves would have to be large enough to carry families, tools, supplies, and seeds of their culture. They would need storage compartments capable of holding genetic materials in stable conditions. They might carry advanced machinery that could replicate tools from raw resources found on Earth. If they knew Earth had the elements necessary for survival, they would design their ships to make use of that knowledge. They wouldn't bring everything. They would bring the essentials needed to begin again. The journey through darkness wouldn't feel like an adventure. It would feel like an obligation carried through by people who understood responsibility. Those aboard the vessels would likely be chosen for resilience, discipline, and adaptability. Not warriors or elites, but settlers prepared to build a foundation for future generations. Their training would include everything from agriculture to engineering to environmental assessment. They wouldn't expect Earth to welcome them without challenge. New worlds come with unknown dangers, but they would trust in their preparation. During the long voyage, the travellers would live in an environment carefully controlled by their ship's systems. Artificial gravity, regulated temperature, circulating atmosphere, and carefully monitored supplies would be part of everyday life. They would adjust to routines shaped by the needs of the vessel. They would walk along corridors lit by steady lights, eat food grown in hydroponic gardens, and sleep in quiet rooms, where the distant hum of engines reminded them that they were far from any planet's sky. Their children, if the journey lasted long enough, might be born in transit. Those children would never know Nibiru. They would know only the interior of the ship and the promise of the world awaiting them. The psychological strain of such a voyage cannot be understated. Generations born in enclosed environments often develop deep attachments to routines, to predictable spaces, to familiar voices. Conversations recorded from Nibiru might have been preserved to remind the travellers of their origins. Lessons passed down verbally would form a bridge between the past and the future. Families might gather in communal areas designed to resemble parts of their homeworld. Artificial windows might project images of Nibiru's skies to keep memory alive. Even if the travellers accepted they might never see their home again, they would still carry it with them through stories, rituals, and the soft habits of daily life. As they approached Earth, the adjustments would become more complex. Their ship would need to match the sun's gravitational field, shift its velocity, and prepare for atmospheric entry. The crew would examine Earth's climate, atmospheric composition, geological stability, and surface conditions. If they had observed Earth from afar for centuries, they would have known its patterns well. Still, they would need to make sure nothing had changed dramatically since their last measurements. The first sight of Earth up close would likely leave them silent. A world covered in blue oceans wrapped in clouds, with continents shaped by wind and water. They would see forests, deserts, lakes, and coastlines. Compared to the stark distances of their own world, Earth would feel vibrant. The colours would appear richer, the atmosphere thicker. Even the light would look different. Nibiru's long orbit might have exposed them to weaker sunlight for extended periods. Earth's brightness would feel almost overwhelming. Landing wouldn't be as simple as descending through the atmosphere. They would need a site chosen for safety, resources, and adaptability. Broad plains, river valleys, or coastal regions might serve as ideal locations. They would need access to fresh water, fertile soil, and natural protection from extreme weather. Their vessel might descend slowly, guided by thrusters and stabilized by carefully calibrated systems. They would have rehearsed this moment countless times. Still, the actual landing would fill the interior with tension. Even the best planning cannot account for every variable. When the doors finally opened, the settlers would step into air warmer and heavier than what they were used to. They would feel gravity different from their homeworld's pull. They would walk on soil that had never known their footsteps. Local plant life would brush against them, carrying scents unlike anything they had smelled on Nibiru. The sound of wind moving through foliage might surprise them. A world filled with life makes noise, a constant hum of movement. Their ears would need time to adjust. The settlers would begin by establishing a sheltered base. Using tools brought from their vessel, they would build simple structures capable of withstanding Earth's weather. They might survey the surrounding landscape, taking samples of plants, water, and soil. Their scientists would analyze Earth's microorganisms to ensure they were not threatened by unfamiliar bacteria. Over time, they would learn which plants were edible, which animals posed danger, and which resources could be used safely. As they settled, they would begin shaping Earth's environment to fit their needs. They might plant seeds brought from their homeworld, experimenting with which crops could grow in Earth's soil. Some might fail, others might adapt. The settlers would adjust their methods, finding ways to combine Nibiruan knowledge with Earth's natural advantages. Gradually, they would create a sustainable food supply, allowing the population to grow. Future generations born on Earth would look at their parents and grandparents with a different understanding. For them, Earth would be home. They wouldn't have memories of Nibiru or an instinctive connection to its long, cosmic rhythm. They would grow up with Earth's quicker cycles. Their bodies would adapt to its atmosphere and gravity. Over time, the settlers would change physically, biologically, and behaviourally, blending into the environment rather than standing apart from it. Knowledge of the journey would remain, but its clarity would soften. Stories told around early fires might transform from detailed accounts into symbolic narratives. A long voyage becomes a descent of gods. A ship becomes a chariot of fire. The settlers who came down the ramp become beings who descended from the sky. Details blur as generations pass, but the essence remains. Humanity came from above. As these communities grew, they would eventually spread across continents, carrying traces of their origins in their teachings, symbols, and customs. They might construct monuments pointing skyward, not as religious expressions, but as ways of remembering the path their ancestors travelled. They would align structures with stars, not because those stars ruled their fate, but because those stars once guided their past. Across time, as Earth's civilizations rose and fell, the details of the journey from Nibiru would fade further. Only fragments would survive in myths, in tablets, in oral traditions. Words like, "the ones who came from the sky," would echo across cultures that never shared direct contact. The consistency of that phrase might be more than coincidence. It might be the last preserved hint of a migration older than memory. Understanding how Nibiru might have carried its people to Earth helps explain why early cultures describe knowledge that seems sudden in origin. Planting techniques, astronomical observations, architectural precision, and social structures appear in human history without gradual evolution. Not because humans were incapable of developing them, but because they may have inherited a framework already refined on another world. And as these ancient stories expanded, they formed the foundation of the next part of the journey, where Nibiru's long orbit shaped the very people who eventually made the crossing. The possibility that humanity's earliest ancestors originated on Nibiru depends on understanding what sort of world it might have been. Not in mystical terms, but in the grounded logic of planetary science, environmental pressure, and the ways culture grows under conditions different from anything Earth has ever experienced. To imagine life beginning on such a wandering world, it's helpful to picture not a mythical realm, but a planet shaped by an orbit so long and stretched that its journey through the sun's influence feels more like a slow migration than a cycle. If Nibiru moved through the outer reaches of the solar system, then the environment its people knew would have shaped them in ways both harsh and deeply formative. A long orbit means long seasons, far longer than even the most extreme cycles on Earth. One side of the orbit would be defined by a distant cold that lasted for generations. Families would raise children in climates where warmth was a rare visitor. The other side of the orbit might bring a brief interval of moderate temperatures when sunlight reached the world with enough intensity to stir oceans, shift weather, and awaken dormant ecosystems. Instead of spring, summer, autumn, and winter repeating within a single lifetime, Nibiru's inhabitants might experience each stage of climate change in a way that spanned centuries. A generation born into relative warmth might grow old in a slowly cooling environment. Their children might be born into the beginning of a long freeze. Their grandchildren might never know warmth at all. Such a world creates a culture of preparation. People living under these conditions wouldn't rely on short-term strategies or impulsive decisions. They would think carefully, plan for events far beyond their own lives, and pass knowledge down with precision. Their understanding of time itself would differ from humanity's earthbound perspective. They would measure eras, not years. They would understand cycles that stretched across multiple generations and track subtle changes in the environment with a seriousness that borders on instinct. Every shift in temperature, every alteration in daylight, every slow movement of atmospheric patterns would be read as a sign of broader changes to come. Life on Earth evolved quickly in comparison. Our planet is warm, energetic, and relatively stable. Seasons are short, dictated by a fast orbit around the sun. Plants sprout within weeks, weather systems rise and fall in days, and cycles unfold with a pace that keeps environmental change within the range of immediate human experience. But Nibiru, if it ever harboured life, would move with a tempo so slow that adapting to it would require patience embedded into the very culture of its people. They would learn early that survival depended on conserving resources, designing efficient solutions, and thinking in long arcs. The possibility that such a world could be a cradle of life rests on understanding that life doesn't always thrive under mild conditions. Sometimes it grows stronger in extremes. The long periods of cold would require biological systems capable of entering dormancy, slowing metabolic processes, and preserving energy. Evolution on Nibiru might favour organisms that could withstand drastic temperature changes or cycles of scarcity and abundance. A species that learned to thrive in such an environment would carry resilience beyond anything seen on Earth. Their bodies might have developed efficient thermal regulation. Their lungs might have adapted to thinner atmospheres. Their eyes might be accustomed to navigating dimmer light. If the earliest humans are truly descendants of travellers from such a planet, then the adaptability humans show on Earth, our ability to live in deserts, tundras, jungles, mountains and coastlines, could reflect an inherited resilience. A species evolved on a world of extremes might find Earth's variety surprisingly manageable. The rapid weather changes here would be predictable compared to the slow shifts of their homeworld. Seasons that last only a few months would feel mild. Even Earth's natural disasters might seem less overwhelming in comparison to generational cycles of climate change on a distant, slowly moving planet. The long orbit would have shaped not only biology but technology. A world that experiences centuries of cold would require efficient ways of storing energy, preserving food, and maintaining life through long periods when sunlight was scarce. The search for solutions would drive innovation. Fire might not be enough. They would need sustainable forms of energy that could last through quiet eras. They might harness geothermal heat deep below their planet's crust. They might build structures designed to retain warmth through thick layers of insulation using materials unavailable on Earth, or combining them with remarkable durability. A civilization built under such constraints would learn quickly that they couldn't rely on chance. They would develop scientific practices focused on prediction and measurement. Calculating orbital mechanics, tracking the movements of stars and understanding gravitational rhythms would be essential for knowing when warmth would return. Children might grow up learning to read celestial patterns the way Earth's earliest humans learned to track animal migrations. The sky wouldn't be a backdrop, it would be a lifeline, a complex system of signs guiding the future of the species. Humans on Earth often tell stories of gods or ancestors descending from the heavens, with knowledge of astronomy, agriculture and law. Those stories might reflect memories of people who truly lived under a sky they studied with intense discipline, whose survival depended on understanding distant cycles. For them, recognizing the movement of planets and stars wouldn't be a mystical art. It would be the practical foundation of their lives. On Nibiru, agriculture would require strategies unlike anything on Earth. Crops would need to survive long periods without strong sunlight. Some might grow underground, nourished by geothermal heat, or carefully directed artificial lighting. Others might enter dormant states, capable of waiting through decades of cold before emerging again. Fields might not resemble Earth's farms. Instead of wide, open plots filled with sunlight, Nibiru's agriculture might take place in enclosed structures designed to shield plants from cold. These structures would be built to last for generations, passed down from parents to children as essential parts of their communities. The long orbit could also create cultural patterns centered on stewardship. People raised in an environment where mismanaging resources could lead to extinction might place high value on responsibility. They wouldn't waste materials or pursue reckless projects. Every invention, every policy, every community decision would be measured against long-term consequences. This perspective might explain why the ancestors described in ancient stories often appear as careful guides rather than conquerors. A society accustomed to thinking in centuries would see no benefit in short-lived dominance. They would focus instead on continuity, longevity and preservation. Nibiru's environment might also create a unique sense of social structure. Communities would need to work together to prepare for the long cold. Individualism, while possible, would be tempered by an understanding that survival required cooperation. Education would span generations, with older members sharing wisdom gained from previous cycles. Children would learn not only from their parents, but from stories preserved through centuries. A culture built on such collaboration might excel at organizing long-term projects, including interplanetary travel. It's also possible that Nibiru, moving through the outer regions of the solar system, encountered cosmic dangers rarely threatening Earth. Radiation levels in distant regions might fluctuate in ways that required careful shielding. The planet's magnetic field might not have been strong enough to protect its inhabitants from every burst of cosmic energy. Over time, this could lead to advancements in shielding technologies, materials science, and medical research. A species accustomed to such dangers would develop solutions that Earth alone might never demand. The planet's long journey would also shape its knowledge of other worlds. If Nibiru periodically drew closer to the inner solar system, its people would see Earth not as an unfathomably distant place, but as a nearby neighbour during warm cycles. They could observe Earth's environment, study its atmosphere, and track its growth from afar. Over thousands of years, they might collect enough information to determine that Earth was suitable for life, even if the conditions differed from their own. This long familiarity could explain why ancient stories speak of visitors arriving with purpose rather than exploration. They didn't stumble on Earth by accident. They might have known its existence for longer than human history stretches. When their world's cycles grew harsher, or when their population needed expansion, they might have seen Earth as an opportunity, not for conquest, but for continuity. The internal pressures of their long orbit could also push them toward migration. As Nibiru drifted farther from the sun, its civilizations might face increasing strain. The dark part of the orbit could lengthen over millennia. Small variations in orbital path might amplify environmental challenges. If they saw these changes early enough, they would have time to plan. Migration wouldn't be a desperate act. It would be a strategic choice, made carefully over generations. The idea that a world on such a distant orbit could generate advanced technology might seem counterintuitive at first, but harsh environments often produce innovation. Earth's coldest, driest, and most challenging regions often inspire the most resourceful solutions. A planet where survival depends on foresight would push its people to think far beyond their immediate needs. The unpredictable light of their sun, sometimes strong and sometimes faint, would teach them to harness every available resource efficiently. Solar technologies might not rely on constant light, but on storage systems capable of preserving energy from short intervals of warmth. The long years of darkness could inspire the development of artificial ecosystems, controlled environments, and sustainable living systems. A civilization trained to build habitats capable of enduring prolonged cold might eventually learn to build vessels capable of surviving interplanetary distances. The same skills used to preserve life on their world would translate naturally into preserving life in space. Over time, these advancements could accumulate into a society uniquely positioned to travel between worlds. Their ships might not resemble the sleek crafts of science fiction. They might be immense, durable structures designed for stability rather than speed. They might rely on slow but steady propulsion, matching the patient rhythm of their creators. These vessels would not need to outrun light. They would need only to carry their people safely across the void. Nibiru's long orbit may also explain why the memory of such a world fades in human history. If the planet passes through the inner solar system only rarely, then Earth's ancient civilizations might have seen it only once or twice in thousands of years. They might record a mysterious red star, a celestial visitor, or a glowing object moving across the sky. But without predictable motion, the memory would become obscured. Later generations, unfamiliar with the rhythm of the sky, would interpret such sightings through myth. A wandering planet becomes a god returning. A distant world becomes a symbol rather than a scientific concept. For Nibiru's people, the long path would create a sense of both belonging and displacement. Their world would feel familiar but never entirely stable. The cold years might stretch long enough to challenge their identity. The warm years might feel too brief, like a pause in a larger struggle. Generations might grow up hearing stories of the last warm era, waiting for the next one, hoping their children might experience it. In such a world, longing for a stable home would be a natural part of cultural consciousness. Earth, with its steady orbit and reliable sunlight, would feel like a place where life could finally breathe without counting the years between warm seasons. If humanity carries even faint echoes of that mindset, it might explain our tendency to build for permanence, to seek stability, to long for home in a way that goes beyond geography. The human desire for lasting structures, for stories that endure, for memory that spans ages, might reflect instincts older than Earth's landscapes. As we continue into the next part of this story, the focus shifts from the nature of Nibiru as a cradle of life to the people who may have risen from its surface, shaped by its long orbit and driven by its challenges. The decision to leave a world is never simple, especially when that world has carried a people through ages marked by long cycles of cold and brief intervals of warmth. For the inhabitants of Nibiru, if such a civilization once existed, the idea of departure would not arise from sudden desperation. It would grow slowly, the way an understanding deepens over centuries. Their planet's long orbit would bring predictable challenges, but occasionally subtle shifts might introduce new risks, small changes that accumulate until the familiar cold becomes a deeper chill, and the promise of returning warmth stretches farther away. A people accustomed to watching the sky for signs would notice these shifts early. They would read them not as omens, but as data, recorded meticulously across generations. Life on Nibiru, shaped by a long orbit, would revolve around careful tracking of environmental patterns. Ordinary people, not just scholars, would recognise fluctuations in light and temperature with a precision equivalent to reading a clock. When the first signs appeared that the warm interval was shifting, they would take it seriously. Leaders, scientists, engineers, and mathematicians might gather to examine records carved into stone, etched into metal, or preserved in methods suited to withstand the harsh climate. Each archive would reflect centuries of observations: the waxing and waning of ice sheets, the migration of ocean currents, the behaviour of deep-sea vents that supported life in the coldest eras. The conclusion might not be immediate. Some experts might argue that the shift was temporary, part of a natural variation. Others might warn that the orbit had subtly altered, perhaps due to gravitational interactions or internal changes to the planet's balance. Over time, the evidence would accumulate. The warm interval might be shorter than usual. The cold might linger longer. Crops grown in carefully controlled environments might show signs of reduced yield. Energy reserves stored for lean periods might need replenishing more often. Families might begin to notice that children born during the cold years grew up in conditions harsher than their grandparents remembered. A people who survive by anticipating long-term changes are unlikely to ignore such signs. They would understand that even small shifts could become significant over centuries. With that understanding, discussions would turn toward large-scale solutions. Some would focus on improving life support systems to endure longer cold cycles. Others would push for expanding geothermal networks or increasing energy storage capacities. But the most ambitious minds might propose a different path, ensuring the survival of their species by seeking stability beyond their homeworld. Leaving a planet is not an instinctive act. It requires imagining a future far removed from familiar landscapes, from the architecture built by ancestors, from the rhythms that shape their identity. The thought would bring both resistance and curiosity. Some would argue that their world had sustained them for millennia, and would continue to do so if they adapted. Others would point to the growing evidence that their planet's stability could no longer be guaranteed. In a society accustomed to thinking in centuries, the argument for migration would not be based on fear but on reason. The question wouldn't be about abandoning a failing world. It would be about ensuring that life continued in a place where its roots could grow without the constant threat of extended cold. The first step would involve selecting those who would represent the best of their civilization. They wouldn't be chosen for power or wealth, but for traits that ensured the community's success in unfamiliar environments. Engineers capable of adapting structures to new atmospheres, scientists trained to analyze alien ecosystems, agricultural experts who could read soil and climate with practiced eyes, medical specialists who understood how bodies respond to stress, isolation and change. Children would not be excluded. A long journey demands generations, not individuals. Families might be chosen based on resilience, knowledge, genetic health, and the ability to teach future generations with clarity and patience. The ones chosen would undergo intensive preparation. They would learn how to operate the vessels that would carry them through the void. They would study images and data collected about Earth if Nibiru regularly approached the inner solar system. They would examine atmospheric composition, gravitational pull, temperature range, and potential hazards. If life already existed on Earth, they would need to understand its bacteria, viruses, and biological cycles. The goal wouldn't be domination, but survival and coexistence. Any species intelligent enough to leave its home planet would understand that recklessness threatens longevity. Preparing for departure would be a communal effort. Entire regions of Nibiru might dedicate themselves to building the necessary vessels, gathering the required materials, and teaching the skills needed for a sustainable life on another world. The construction of spacefaring ships would reflect the culture that built them. They wouldn't be flashy or wasteful. They would be sturdy, efficient, and designed to last not merely through transit, but through generations of use. They might include living quarters that mimic familiar environments from Nibiru, reducing psychological stress. Hydroponic gardens might be integrated to produce food and maintain air quality. Storage compartments might be designed to preserve genetics, seeds, tools, and knowledge. The decision to leave would carry emotional weight. Elders who had lived through previous cycles might remember a time when the warm interval lasted longer, when life felt easier. Leaving the only world they had ever known would feel like stepping into uncertainty. But the younger generation might see opportunity, not loss. To them, Earth would represent a place where their children could grow without the burden of waiting for centuries-long shifts in climate. They would carry the hope of establishing a future built on stability rather than endurance. Before departure, the chosen families and crews might gather for ceremonies marking the transition. These wouldn't be symbolic in an abstract sense, but grounded in the understanding that leaving one's world is a moment worth acknowledging. They might share stories about the planet that shaped them, recounting knowledge preserved across cycles. They might speak about ancestors who survived earlier eras of cold, paying respect to the resilience embedded in their culture. They would carry those memories forward, not to cling to the past, but to ensure that their identity remained intact even as they stepped into the unknown. The launch itself would be gradual. The vessels might lift slowly through layers of atmosphere, guided by a network of support stations built in previous centuries for maintaining orbital infrastructure. From above, Nibiru would look both familiar and distant, a world of ice fields, volcanic regions, oceans preserved under thermal caps, and communities spread across its surface like clusters of light. As they ascended, the settlers might look down and feel a sense of loss mixed with determination. They would know they might never see their world again. Once in space, the ships would align themselves with a trajectory refined by centuries of astronomical observation. They would need to calculate gravitational influences, solar radiation levels, and the safest intervals for travel. Even in the cold reaches far beyond the sun's warmth, a civilization accustomed to extreme conditions would know how to harness or shield against these forces. Their engines might rely on energy sources unfamiliar to Earth, perhaps a combination of stored solar energy from warmer eras, geothermal batteries, or technologies developed specifically for long journeys in low-light environments. Whatever they used, it would be stable, durable, and capable of operating for decades or even centuries. Life aboard the vessels would resemble an extension of life on Nibiru. Families would establish routines to maintain mental and physical health. Children born during the journey would learn about their homeworld through stories, images, recordings, and lessons preserved by their parents. They would also study Earth, preparing for the planet that awaited them. Their education would include reading atmospheric reports, understanding gravity differences, and practicing survival skills tailored to Earth's environment. Inside the ships, communal spaces might offer areas to gather, learn, and maintain morale. Hydroponic gardens would provide food, fresh air, and a sense of connection to living systems. People would tend these gardens daily, not just as a practical task, but as a reminder of their continuity. Rituals from home might be adapted to ship life, stabilizing emotions and reinforcing cultural identity. Children might play within designated areas designed with soft surfaces, artificial lighting, and familiar textures. They would learn to walk in controlled gravity. They would grow strong even in a vessel drifting through silent regions of space. During the journey, crew members would monitor the health of every person aboard. They would track bone density, muscle strength, immune function, and psychological well-being. They would adjust diet and activity levels to ensure that future generations could thrive on Earth once the journey ended. Teams would rotate responsibilities, maintaining the vessel's systems, protecting against radiation, repairing structural components, and ensuring that everything operated within safe parameters. Outside the ship, the darkness would stretch in every direction. The settlers would see stars, but not as Earth sees them. They would observe them through specialized windows or screens designed to filter harmful radiation. They would track their course by comparing the patterns they observed with star maps recorded on Nibiru. Although they were surrounded by emptiness, the path they followed would feel familiar because their ancestors had mapped it across ages. As the ships approached the inner solar system, the crew would intensify their observations of Earth. They would measure the planet's rotation, track the movement of continents, and identify safe landing regions. They would monitor weather systems, seasonal cycles, and biological activity. If Earth already harboured life, they would need to ensure that their presence did not disrupt ecosystems or expose them to unseen dangers. These settlers might spend months in orbit around Earth, gathering samples and studying the environment with careful attention. The first sight of Earth would fill the vessels with a quiet sense of anticipation. Compared to the dim landscapes of Nibiru, Earth's colours would appear vivid. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds, and warm deserts would form a mosaic of life. The air would be thicker, the atmosphere more protective, and the presence of abundant liquid water would be a sign of stability. For people who came from a world shaped by long cycles of cold, Earth would feel like a place that breathed more quickly. When they finally descended toward the surface, they would choose regions that offered the resources necessary for survival. Areas near rivers, lakes, or coastlines would provide water. Regions with fertile soil would support agriculture. They would avoid regions prone to extreme weather or geological instability. Once on the surface, they would begin constructing shelters using materials brought from their vessel, combined with resources found on Earth. Their early structures might resemble the habitats they used during extended cold periods on Nibiru. Thick walls, insulating materials, controlled environments, and sustainable power systems would be common features. The settlers would not expect immediate comfort. They would need to learn Earth's rhythms quickly. They would observe seasonal patterns, track animal migrations, and study plant growth. Their scientists would analyze Earth's microorganisms to ensure they did not pose significant threats. Their engineers would adapt tools and technologies to local resources. Their agricultural specialists would test soil samples, cross-reference nutrient compositions, and determine which crops could thrive. As the community expanded, the settlers would teach their children about Nibiru, but they would also teach them that Earth was now their life's foundation. Stories of the long-orbiting world would shape cultural identity but would not overshadow the need to adapt. Over generations, the settlers would become Earth's inhabitants, physically blending with the environment and gradually losing the physiological traits shaped by Nibiru's extremes. Their descendants might still share stories of the world left behind, tales of a long journey, of cycles measured in centuries, of a people shaped by endurance and patience. But as time passed, those stories would soften into legends. The details would blur, the scientific explanations would become metaphorical, and eventually what had once been a clear record of migration might become a story about beings who descended from the sky. These stories, preserved in human cultures worldwide, may reflect the memory of those who left their first world behind. And as those descendants adapted fully to Earth, they would carry forward the legacy of their journey, shaping the next stages of humanity's unfolding story. When the vessels from Nibiru finally reached Earth, the moment of descent would not resemble the dramatic scenes often imagined in later myths. It would feel more like the quiet culmination of centuries of planning, observation, and endurance. The people aboard the ships would have lived for years inside those metal walls, tending gardens under artificial lights, maintaining systems to preserve air quality, teaching their children lessons passed down from elders who remembered the last warm era on their wandering world. By the time they arrived, they would be ready not for conquest or spectacle, but simply for the next step in a long journey. Their landing would be the steady transfer of life from one world to another. Earth's early environment would appear vibrant to them, richer in colour, more dynamic in climate, and louder with the sound of life than anything they had experienced. The seas would reflect sunlight in ways Nibiru's cold oceans rarely did. Forests would sway with breezes that carried a warmth foreign to those who grew up in climates dominated by cold intervals. The air itself would smell different, infused with organic compounds from dense vegetation, microorganisms and minerals released through Earth's cycles. For travellers accustomed to living indoors or in carefully protected habitats, the sensory impact would be profound. As the ships positioned themselves for descent, the crew would prepare every system meticulously. They would review atmospheric data, calibrate thermal shielding, and check landing thrusters designed to operate under a wide range of conditions. The descent sequence would be guided by the same disciplined approach that allowed them to survive harsh cycles on their home planet. Each crew member would follow procedures rehearsed countless times. They would measure wind speeds, air density, and surface temperature. They would confirm that the chosen landing area aligned with the requirements for long-term settlement: stable terrain, abundant fresh water, access to fertile soil, and protection from extreme weather. The vessels might descend slowly, adjusting their path as atmospheric drag increased. Heat would build along the outer hull, but their shielding, developed to handle temperature shifts far more dramatic than Earth's, would tolerate the descent. The sound inside the ships would change subtly as the craft interacted with the planet's air. Vibrations would travel through the walls, a reminder that they were leaving the vacuum of space behind. The crew would brace themselves, not out of fear but out of habit. They would know that even well-designed systems needed careful attention during the final stages of landing. When the vessel touched down, dust would rise around the landing site. Earth's soil, which had never encountered machinery from another world, would respond with a natural plume that settled slowly. Inside the ship, alarms would remain silent, indicating stability. The crew would move through their checklists, confirming that the structure had not sustained damage. They would inspect the landing gear, pressurization systems, and external sensors. Only when everything aligned with safety thresholds would they proceed to prepare for disembarkation. Stepping outside for the first time would be a carefully controlled process. The settlers would not rush. They would test air quality using instruments designed to measure trace elements, allergenic compounds, microbial content, and particulate levels. Even though their long-range observations had confirmed Earth's suitability, they would want real-time data to ensure that no anomalies existed. Once the readings matched expectations, they would allow small groups to exit first, wearing protective suits to reduce the risk of exposure. These suits might not resemble the heavy gear seen in modern depictions of space travel. They could be lightweight, flexible, and designed to regulate temperature efficiently, shaped by centuries of adapting to the cold extremes of their own world. When the first humans stepped onto Earth's surface, they would do so under a rising sun. Dawnlight would spread across the land in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. Sunlight on Nibiru during its warm intervals would be dimmer and less consistent, but Earth's star would shine with a steady intensity that would feel almost overwhelming. The settlers' eyes would adjust slowly, their pupils narrowing, their vision interpreting the landscape with a combination of caution and wonder. The ground beneath their feet would feel warmer, richer, and softer than the terrain of Nibiru's colder cycles. Earth's soil, shaped by microbial life and abundant organic matter, would carry a texture foreign to those who grew up in climates dominated by frozen ground or mineral-heavy surfaces. As they walked, they would note the humidity in the air, the faint pressure of wind, and the sound of insects or small animals moving through vegetation. Every sense would engage at once, marking the first day of their new existence. The settlers' first actions would focus on establishing a safe perimeter. They would deploy scanning equipment to map the immediate region, searching for geological stability, water sources, and potential hazards. They would test the soil for its mineral content and nutrient balance. Teams specializing in environmental studies would analyze plant life, determining which species were nutritious, which were harmful, and how local ecosystems functioned. Their work would require caution, precision, and patience. While Earth was suitable for life, every world carries dangers unknown to newcomers. Once the initial assessments confirmed safety, the settlers would begin constructing temporary shelters. These structures might combine materials brought from their vessels with resources gathered on site. They might use modular panels capable of resisting fluctuations in temperature. Their architecture would be functional rather than decorative, focusing on insulation, airflow, and durability. Their early shelters would not blend seamlessly with Earth's environment. They would stand out as advanced constructs made for survival rather than aesthetics. Over time, however, these structures would evolve as the settlers learned to use local resources more effectively. Inside the shelters, the settlers would set up living quarters. Families would establish private rooms, communal spaces, and working areas. They would recreate aspects of life on Nibiru, lighting patterns that mimicked home, temperature settings familiar to their bodies, and systems designed to maintain clean air. The transition from ship to shelter would not disrupt their routines entirely. Meals would still be eaten in organised intervals. Children would still receive education from teachers or caretakers. Daily exercises designed to maintain physical strength would continue. The first meals on Earth would be prepared using supplies stored during the voyage. These would include nutrient-rich plants grown in hydroponic systems, preserved foods, and possibly early experimental crops introduced during the journey. As the settlers explored Earth's resources, they would slowly incorporate local ingredients into their meals, testing each for safety and nutritional value. Their agricultural experts would analyze seeds, fruits, and edible plants with careful attention, using instruments to detect chemical compositions and potential toxins. Water collection would be a major priority. The settlers would identify streams or lakes nearby, drawing samples for analysis. Earth's water cycles, influenced by weather systems and groundwater patterns, would need careful study. The settlers might build filtration systems capable of removing bacterial and mineral contaminants. They would use their advanced knowledge of resource management to ensure a steady, safe water supply. Water would not just be used for drinking, it would support agriculture, hygiene, and early construction projects. As days passed, the settlers would begin adjusting to Earth's quicker rhythms. The planet's rotation, much faster than Nibiru's, would create day-night cycles that felt short. Sleep patterns would shift accordingly. Some settlers might experience difficulty at first, waking before their bodies fully regained energy. Over time, their biological clocks would adapt to Earth's schedule. Children born on Earth would grow into this rhythm naturally, never knowing the long twilight hours of their ancestors' home. Earth's gravity, differing from Nibiru's depending on size and composition, would also require adjustment. If Nibiru were larger or denser, Earth's gravity would feel lighter, allowing movement with greater ease. If Nibiru were smaller or less dense, Earth's gravity would feel heavier, creating a period of physical strain as muscles adapted. In either case, the settlers would develop exercise routines, strengthening their bodies to match their new environment. Over generations, this physical adaptation would blend their physiology with Earth's conditions, slowly altering traits shaped by their original world. Exploring Earth would reveal an astonishing range of life forms. Plants that grew rapidly, animals that moved freely through forests, grasslands, and waters, insects that swarmed in patterns unfamiliar to anyone raised in the colder cycles of Nibiru. The settlers would observe these creatures from a respectful distance, cataloguing species and documenting behaviours. Their early drawings or recordings might later become symbols reflected in human myths, stories, and art. They would learn which animals posed no threat and which required caution. They would adapt their shelters, food storage practices, and daily routines accordingly. The settlers' scientists would analyse Earth's atmosphere in greater depth. Oxygen levels, nitrogen balance, trace gases, and climatic variations would all influence long-term survival. They would track weather systems, rain patterns, cloud formations, and seasonal winds. Earth storms, sudden compared to Nibiru's slow climatic changes, might surprise them at first. They would learn to predict these storms using their instruments, adapting their shelters and agricultural practices to account for the rapid shifts. In the early months, the settlers would begin cultivating crops. They would start with plants brought from their home world, using bioengineered seeds capable of growing in a range of conditions. Some might thrive in Earth's nutrient-rich soil, others might fail due to differences in atmospheric composition or microbial interactions. Agricultural specialists would note each success and failure, adjusting techniques accordingly. Over time, they would incorporate Earth's native plants into their diet, discovering new flavours, textures, and nutritional profiles. During these early years, children born on Earth would learn skills shaped by both worlds. They would learn the careful observation techniques their parents used on Nibiru. They would study Earth's plants, animals, and geological features. They would participate in tasks essential for survival, tending gardens, maintaining shelters, collecting materials for construction. These children would represent the first generation fully adapted to Earth's environment, bridging the knowledge of their ancestors with the needs of their new world. The settlers' early interactions with Earth's environment would eventually lead to the construction of more permanent structures. They would use local stone, wood, and clay, integrating tools brought from their vessels with the resources found nearby. They would avoid large-scale intervention at first, focusing on sustainability rather than domination. Their structures might include early forms of irrigation, water storage systems, and energy harnessing tools. Their advanced knowledge would guide these projects, but they would learn from Earth's climate how best to build. If their knowledge included astronomy, they would track Earth's sky, cataloguing constellations and planetary movements. They would note the moon's cycles and how they affected tides. They would relate these patterns to their ancient observations, noticing the differences and using them to teach younger generations the importance of adaptation. Over time, they might build structures aligned with celestial events, not as mystical monuments but as practical tools to track seasons, planting cycles and environmental changes. As their settlement grew, they would begin to blend with Earth's landscape, observing its challenges and harnessing its potential. Their technologies might gradually become simpler as generations grew further removed from Nibiru's advanced systems. Machines would wear down, materials would degrade, and tools would need to be replaced with those crafted from local resources. Their society would shift slowly, incorporating aspects of Earth's natural rhythms into their way of life. The memory of their arrival might persist through stories shared among families. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, would carry the details of their journey, but gradually lose technical elements. Over time, words describing spacecraft, energy systems, or astronomical navigation might be replaced by terms more easily understood by children. A vessel becomes a chariot, engines become fire, navigation lights become stars guiding travellers through the void. As centuries passed, these memories would soften even further, transforming into myths about ancestors who came from the sky. Future generations, born long after the last original Nibiruan had passed away, would hear tales about a distant homeworld but would not know it firsthand. Their world would be Earth. Their identity would be shaped by Earth's landscapes, seasons, and challenges. But the stories of their origins would remain, encoded into symbols, rituals, and cultural practices. These stories would evolve as communities grew, moved, and adapted. Some would become regional myths. Others would be shared across continents. The idea of being placed here, guided here, or descended from those who came from above might reflect the earlier settlers' arrival. And as humans spread across the earth, carrying those stories with them, the memory of dawnlight on arrival would remain a quiet thread connecting people back to the moment when their ancestors first stepped onto new soil. The next stage of this unfolding story moves from the landing itself into how those settlers adapted to Earth. reshaping themselves and their culture as they built a life on a planet that offered stability and possibility. The earlier settlers from Nibiru would not have remained separate from Earth for long, even with careful preparation, advanced knowledge, and generations of planning. Adapting to a new world requires more than technology. It requires a willingness to let the environment shape you. On Earth, every element, the soil, the air, the water, the light, the sounds of life, would begin influencing the settlers from the moment they stepped onto the ground. Their journey didn't end with landing. It began there, shifting from survival in ships to survival in a living world that changed more quickly than any climate cycle they had ever known. Earth's pace would surprise them at first. Plants sprouted in weeks instead of years. Weather patterns shifted in days instead of seasons. Animals moved across landscapes with an immediacy that demanded constant awareness. Where Nibiru's cold era stretched across generations, Earth's conditions changed rapidly, pushing them to adjust constantly. Their knowledge would serve as a starting point, but not a fixed guide. Every day on Earth required learning anew, making choices that would alter their future and the future of their descendants. Clay would become one of the first materials they engaged with, not only as a tool but as a way of understanding Earth's composition. On Nibiru, the soil might have contained minerals shaped by long freezes and slow geological activity. Earth's soil would feel alive in comparison, enriched by microorganisms and organic matter. The settlers would learn that clay here was pliable, capable of being formed into containers, bricks, or surfaces for writing. They might use it to create early records, documenting their transition, or to build ovens, water channels, and reinforced walls. Clay would offer durability and familiarity. Even if their original world had different geological structures, the concept of shaping Earth into useful forms would come naturally to a people accustomed to engineering for long-term stability. Alongside clay came memory, not just as a concept, but as a driving mechanism of adaptation. The settlers brought with them stories of their world, tales of the warm cycles and the cold cycles, lessons passed down across generations that taught them how to survive hardship. On Earth, these memories acted as a foundation for decision-making. They guided early agriculture, influenced settlement structures, and helped organize social roles. But memory is not static. It bends as needs change. The settlers' children, born under gentler skies, would carry their parents' stories but soften them over time. As Earth reshaped their daily lives, the details of Nibiru's extremes would fade. The younger generation would interpret those stories differently, adding new layers influenced by their interactions with Earth. This transformation happened gradually, not through a deliberate choice but through ordinary living. A parent telling a story by a fire would use simpler language so a child could understand. Technical terms describing energy cycles or orbital patterns might lose precision in the retelling. Events that happened across centuries on Nibiru would become relatable stories when condensed. Over time, the distance between fact and memory grew, but the purpose remained: to give meaning to origins and to preserve identity. Memory allowed the settlers to remain connected to their past while adapting fully to their new world. Physically, adaptation started with the smallest changes. Muscles adjusted to Earth's gravity. Bones responded to new levels of stress. Lungs accommodated an atmosphere rich in oxygen. Nibiru's air might have been thinner or colder, shaped by long winters and shorter warm intervals. Earth's air, dense and humid in some regions, dry and hot in others, would affect everything from breathing patterns to stamina. Over generations, these changes became permanent. Children born on Earth grew taller or stronger depending on food availability, sunlight exposure, and daily activity levels. Their bodies reflected the environment they grew up in, not the one their ancestors left behind. Diet played an important role in this transformation. Even though the settlers began with stored food and genetically stable crops from Nibiru, they eventually incorporated Earth's plants and animals into their meals. Each new ingredient introduced subtle biological shifts. Nutrient compositions affected metabolism. Local herbs altered digestion. Animal proteins changed muscle development. The settlers would observe these effects carefully, noting which foods increased energy, which caused discomfort, and which offered long-term benefits. Over time, the community adjusted its diet until Earth's resources became a natural part of daily life. Language evolved alongside these physical changes. On Nibiru, the settlers likely spoke a language shaped by the need to convey complex astronomical patterns, geological conditions, and technological processes. On Earth, many of these concepts became less relevant. The settlers needed words for local plants, animals, tools made from Earth's resources, and new social roles that emerged from living in a faster, more dynamic world. As new sounds, names, and descriptions formed, the original language changed. Some words persisted, others merged. Over centuries, descendants might speak a language unrecognizable to their ancestors, shaped entirely by Earth's landscapes and daily experiences. Tools reflected adaptation as well. Early on, the settlers used advanced instruments brought from Nibiru to analyze Earth's environment. These tools allowed precise measurement of atmospheric gases, soil chemistry, and structural stability. But advanced tools require advanced maintenance. As materials degraded or lost functionality, the settlers learned to replace components with Earth's metals, stones, and woods. They used knowledge from their homeworld to shape these materials more efficiently than early Earth cultures might have developed independently. A simple blade designed by a Nibiruan engineer would look similar to tools used by later human societies, yet its origins lay in skills forged on a distant world. The settlers' approach to building communities demonstrated a similar blend of old and new. Their original structures emphasized durability, insulation, and efficient use of energy. On Earth, they adapted these principles to local climates. In hot regions, they built thicker walls or used Earth's natural shading. In cold regions, they relied on techniques from Nibiru's long winters, creating enclosed spaces that retained heat. In temperate regions, they designed homes that allowed airflow and sunlight to pass through at controlled angles. The architectural styles that emerged formed the foundation for later human settlements. Even if most people today wouldn't recognize these influences, aspects of construction in early civilizations might reflect techniques carried from the settlers' first shelters. As the settlers adapted, so did their society. Families developed new roles based on Earth's environment. Hunters learned how to track animals unfamiliar to Nibiruan ecosystems. Gatherers discovered plants that offered medicinal properties. Craft workers learned how to shape Earth's materials into tools that performed tasks once handled by advanced devices. Farmers experimented with irrigation systems inspired by Nibiru's controlled agriculture, but modified to suit Earth's soil and seasonal patterns. Leaders coordinated these efforts, drawing on the structured thinking that had kept their people alive through centuries of cold. The social structures formed on Earth were not rigid. They evolved as communities grew, as children reached adulthood, and as the environment required different approaches. A person skilled in technology might become a teacher, guiding younger generations in the principles behind old systems, even if the original machines no longer functioned. Another might become a healer, studying Earth's plants to supplement medical knowledge brought from Nibiru. Another might serve as a builder, designing structures that combined Nibiruan resilience with Earth's natural resources. Through these roles, the settlers gradually became part of Earth, not as visitors but as inhabitants. Their children played in fields, explored forests, and grew accustomed to Earth's day-night cycle. They learned to read Earth's skies, not in terms of distant orbital mechanics, but in terms of weather and seasons. They formed emotional ties to landscapes that their ancestors once viewed from afar. A river became a landmark, a mountain became a place of gathering, a valley became a home. The process of adaptation also influenced culture. The settlers developed rituals and practices tied to Earth's cycles. They mark the passage of seasons with gatherings or celebrations. They acknowledge the importance of rainfall, harvests, and animal migrations. These activities reflected both practicality and identity, blending knowledge from Nibiru with traditions emerging from Earth's influence. Over time, these practices took on symbolic meaning. They represented the balance between past and present, between survival and growth. Art emerged from this blend as well. Children might draw the animals they saw, using pigments made from local minerals. Adults might carve figures representing ancestors or elements of their home world. These carvings, passed down across generations, might eventually inspire symbols found in ancient human cultures. Spirals, circles, crossed lines, and geometric patterns could reflect the settlers' early attempts to depict memories of Nibiru's sky, its orbit, or its unique natural features. These symbols that recur across human civilizations might trace back to these early expressions of identity. Music and sound played a similar role. On Nibiru, sound might have carried differently in colder, thinner air. On Earth, the settlers encountered a richer acoustic environment. Bird calls, running water, rustling leaves, and shifting winds created a backdrop for daily life. Over time, they would incorporate these sounds into rhythms and chants. Instruments built from wood, bone, or stretched fibers would echo Earth's environment while reflecting creative impulses shaped by their culture. These early sounds might later become the basis for musical traditions spread across continents. Storytelling, as always, served as a bridge across generations. Parents shared tales of Nibiru's cycles, the journey through space, and the landing on Earth. They told stories around fires, teaching children about the resilience and determination that defined their ancestors. As the years passed, details changed. Children interpreted stories through their own experiences. Technical descriptions became simpler. Events spanning centuries became compressed into sequences that fit within a single lifetime. Over time, stories of survival became myths about origins. The settlers who walked out of landing vessels became beings who descended in light or fire. The ships themselves took on new names, reflecting how stories evolve when anchored in memory rather than documentation. As the generations continued, the settlers' integration into Earth grew deeper. Knowledge of Nibiru remained but took on new shapes, influenced by Earth's environment and by the simplicity of oral tradition. The first humans born from this blend of memory and adaptation would not think of themselves as visitors. They would think of themselves as Earth's people. Their ancestral world would be a distant element of identity, preserved in stories, symbols, and occasional glimpses in the night sky when Nibiru's orbit brought it closer. If such alignment ever occurred during those early eras, their adaptability did not erase their origins, it transformed them. Clay shaped into tools or symbols represented their connection to Earth. Memory preserved the foundation of their identity. Adaptation allowed them to thrive. Through these processes, the visitors from Nibiru became the first humans in the sense that their lives, their children, and their culture formed the earlier stages of humanity as history would recognize it. They lived in a world that supported their growth, allowed them to develop new practices, and encouraged them to expand into regions previously untouched by intelligent life. Their descendants spread across continents, carrying knowledge inherited from both worlds. The journey from visitor to inhabitant became complete over centuries, a seamless transformation supported by Earth's abundance and by the settlers' determination to build a future beyond the challenges of their original planet. As these early humans shaped their environment and were shaped by it in return, they laid the foundation for myths, structures, and ideas that would influence civilizations long after the memory of Nibiru faded into symbolism. Their story continued in the next stages of humanity's unfolding, where the reasons for their journey and the legacy they carried shaped the path ahead in ways still reflected in ancient traditions. The settlers who arrived from Nibiru did not leave their world because of adventure or mythic destiny. Their departure carried purpose shaped by the slow, long cycles of a planet whose extreme orbit demanded constant preparation. Understanding why they would choose to seed life on Earth requires stepping fully into the logic of their world, where needs were measured across ages and solutions demanded planning that stretched far beyond a single lifetime. The people of Nibiru would not have risked their survival on a new world without a guiding motive strong enough to outweigh the weight of leaving everything familiar behind. Their planet's long orbit created a series of challenges that repeated across centuries. Each cold era patterned life with limitations. Farming slowed, energy demands increased, stored resources became vital. The warmth that eventually returned could not erase the memory of hardship. As generations worked to overcome these cycles, they would face periods where the cold grew stronger or the warm intervals shortened. Nibiru's environment, shaped by distance from the sun and by gravitational forces, might shift gradually over millennia. Small changes could accumulate into significant impacts, altering climates, weather patterns, and vital ecosystems. A society living under such conditions would need to think ahead constantly, solving problems far earlier than they became dangerous. The people of Nibiru would learn early that their survival depended on anticipating needs before the environment forced their hand. When evidence indicated that upcoming cycles might be longer or more severe, the need for a long-term solution would become clear. They could not rely solely on improving technology for environmental preservation. They needed an option that extended beyond their planet's rhythms. Earth, stable and warm, offered such an option. But the motives for migration were not limited to environmental pressure. Civilizations do not uproot themselves entirely for a single reason. Their golden need, as later storytellers might interpret it, likely consisted of several intertwined goals. Some practical, some cultural, all shaped by the nature of their world. One of the strongest motivations would be the need for sustainable resources. On Nibiru, scarcity would not be a temporary inconvenience, it would be an integrated part of existence. A civilization forced to endure long periods of environmental decline would develop complex systems to store, conserve and ration essential materials, metals vital for machinery, isotopes used for energy production, minerals required for building, plant matter necessary for nutrition. These resources might deplete slowly but steadily. Even careful management could not prevent eventual strain. Earth, in contrast, contained abundant minerals, fertile soils, and ecosystems capable of regenerating quickly. The settlers might not have viewed Earth solely as a place to gather resources and leave. That approach would be short-sighted, unsuitable for a culture used to thinking across centuries. Instead, they might have seen Earth as a world where life could flourish naturally. By introducing or guiding human development here, they ensured that their descendants could build a sustainable future independent of the challenges Nibiru presented. The process of seeding life, or transferring a population to a new world, would reflect this long view. It would not focus on immediate extraction, but on establishing continuity. Continuity was likely central to their identity. A people who endure long cycles of cold must value longevity, stability, and the preservation of culture. They would aspire to maintain their knowledge, beliefs, and social structures across generations that lived through very different environmental conditions. But even the most disciplined society cannot guarantee its survival on a planet whose long journey might eventually place it outside the sun's influence for too long. Establishing life on Earth ensured that their culture, through descendants or through knowledge passed to newly emerging humans, would continue in some form even if Nibiru's future brought irreversible decline. Beyond environmental or resource-based motives, cultural motivations would shape the decision. Nibiru's society might have held principles centered on stewardship. If they believed that survival required not only endurance but responsibility, they might see seeding life on a promising world as a way to fulfill a cultural obligation. Their worldview could incorporate ideas about spreading life where it could thrive, maintaining balance between worlds, or ensuring that knowledge persisted beyond the limits of any single planet. These ideas would emerge naturally in a society that had learned to survive through cooperation, careful planning, and a deep respect for cyclical patterns. It is likely the settlers did not view Earth as empty. Early observations might have revealed life already present. Plants, animals, microorganisms. Rather than disrupting these systems, the Nibiruan settlers might have aimed to coexist or integrate slowly. They would learn from Earth's environment and adapt accordingly. Their goal would be survival, not domination. Their arrival might incorporate small interactions with local ecosystems while avoiding unnecessary harm. Over generations, they could influence human development through teachings, structures, and shared knowledge, blending their culture with Earth's emerging identity. Still, Nibiru's people would not invest centuries of work into creating vessels and preparing a population solely for cultural continuity. They would need a motive that integrated every aspect of survival: physical, social, technological, and generational. Such a motive likely came from the recognition that their civilization could not endure indefinitely on a world shaped by extreme cycles. The golden need, therefore, was the need for stability. Stability of environment, stability of resources, stability of cultural preservation. Earth represented all these things. Certain myths from ancient cultures describe visitors from the sky, bringing knowledge about agriculture, irrigation, astronomy, and construction. These stories often include references to materials that sound similar to metals or elements valued by advanced civilizations. It's possible that Nibiru's people sought specific isotopes or minerals needed for their energy systems. Gold, for example, appears repeatedly in ancient symbolism associated with sky beings or gods. Some interpretations propose that gold or similar conductive materials played a role in technological systems used on Nibiru. If their energy storage or shielding technologies required certain elements, and if those elements became scarce on their homeworld, Earth's abundance could represent a solution. But even if gold or other minerals contributed to their decision, they would not build their entire migration around resource extraction. A people accustomed to careful planning would know that maintaining advanced technology requires cultural infrastructure, raw materials, and consistent environmental conditions. Earth offered all these elements, but extracting them responsibly required a stable population living on the planet. A temporary mission would not suffice. A long-term settlement was necessary, and a long-term settlement required adaptation. Over time, the settlers might incorporate Earth's materials into their construction. Gold could be used for conductive wiring or shielding in early structures. Copper could be shaped into tools. Clay could be used to create containers or tablets. Stone could serve as the foundation for stable shelters. These choices would have practical roots, not symbolic ones. The settlers needed to maintain their equipment and build new tools using Earth's resources. The materials that persisted, gold, copper, clay, stone, might later appear in myths as sacred or meaningful because they represented survival. Energy would also influence their motives. On Nibiru, sunlight might be scarce during the long cold cycles. The settlers would develop alternative energy systems, but these systems would require careful maintenance and resource allocation. Earth's sunlight, consistent and abundant, provided an opportunity to rebuild energy practices. Newly adapted solar technologies could power shelters, tools, and agricultural systems. Water currents and wind could serve as additional energy sources. Establishing a stable energy foundation would require settlers who understood both Nibiruan technology and Earth's environment. Medical concerns would factor into their motivations as well. Life on Nibiru might have exposed them to unique biological conditions, including long periods of dormancy or low-light environments. On Earth, their health needs could shift, requiring new medicines and treatments. Seeding life on a new world would involve identifying plants with medicinal properties, analysing local microorganisms, and integrating Earth-based remedies with their existing practices. This transition would help preserve genetic health across generations, ensuring the population remained strong even as they adapted physically to Earth's environment. The psychological needs of a society also contribute to long-term planning. A people who endured slow seasons of cold might view Earth's rapid cycles as refreshing, comforting, or invigorating. The shift from a world where sunlight was rare to one where it arrived daily could alter mood, productivity, and spiritual beliefs. Seeing life thrive here would reinforce the idea that Earth was not just a survival strategy, but a promising new home. Their children, raised under consistent light, would grow differently. Their view of the universe would shift, grounded in Earth's rhythms rather than Nibiru's extremes. Many ancient stories describe beings from the sky who taught humans how to build, plant, and govern. These stories might reflect the settlers' efforts to shape Earth's early communities. If they intended to seed life here, they would guide emerging societies in ways that ensured stability. Their teachings could help prevent environmental damage, promote cooperative structures, and preserve knowledge. Over time, these interactions might lead Earth's early humans to view the settlers as gods or creators, but the settlers' motives would not focus on power. They would focus on survival and continuity. Teaching local populations sustainable practices would ensure that Earth remained a stable home for generations. Their presence on Earth would not be permanent in the way later cultures imagined. The settlers' technology might degrade over centuries. Their advanced materials could break down, leaving few traceable remnants. Their recorded knowledge might fade as new generations grew up speaking languages shaped by Earth. Their stories about Nibiru would shift into myths about distant realms or heavens. Their tools, once advanced, might be replaced by simpler versions crafted with Earth's materials, but their influence would remain through the behaviours, structures, and traditions introduced early in humanity's development. The golden need that drove their migration to secure a stable future would reflect itself in how their descendants lived. Families would thrive in Earth's ecosystems, communities would grow organically, structures would rise in alignment with natural cycles, knowledge of agriculture, engineering, and astronomy would become part of everyday life. Even if the settlers eventually blended completely with Earth's early humans, their cultural roots would persist in ways that shaped civilization unknowingly. Their approach to seeding life would not rely on biological engineering alone. It would rely on shaping environments, teaching sustainable practices, and guiding early humans towards stability. The settlers might intermarry with emerging human populations or influence genetic traits through natural integration. Over generations, the genetic difference between Nibiru and settlers and early humans would blur, forming a unified population adapted to Earth. Their ultimate success lay in how well they adapted. They did not attempt to recreate Nibiru on Earth. They allowed Earth to shape them, their descendants, and their culture. This willingness to accept change ensured that their survival did not depend solely on their homeworld or their advanced knowledge. Instead, it depended on humility, observation, and integration. The golden need that pulled them across the void was not greed or conquest. It was the need for survival, for stability, for the continuity of a people shaped by harsh cycles and long nights. That need guided every aspect of their migration, from selecting families to constructing vessels, from landing on Earth to teaching the first generations born here. Their journey was not an escape, but an investment in the future. As their descendants spread, they carried with them the faint imprint of Nibiru's lessons: patience, resilience, observation, cooperation. These traits, woven into early human societies, might reflect the influence of a civilization that valued long-term thinking above all else. From this foundation, humanity continued to grow across continents, shaping the next stage of the story where memory and adaptation blended into the symbols and structures that would define Earth's earliest civilizations. As the early settlers from Nibiru adapted to Earth's rhythms, their bodies changed slowly in response to the world around them. Over generations, these changes became permanent, binding their descendants to the new environment. Yet even as their physiology shifted, subtle traces of their origins might remain embedded within the human genome. Understanding how those faint echoes could persist requires viewing the human body as a layered record of adaptation, inheritance, and environmental pressure. Every shift, every encounter with a new climate or food source, every adjustment to Earth's air and gravity leaves markers that persist beyond memory. If humanity carries remnants of origins beyond Earth, they would be found not in myths alone, but in the biological patterns passed down through time. Human DNA holds countless stories, some clear, some obscured by the erosion of time. Distances measured in thousands of years become compressed within patterns that guide development, health, and variation. The human genome contains markers of ancient crossings, migrations from one continent to another, adaptations to cold or heat, resistance to diseases, and countless environmental influences. If the earliest humans were shaped by ancestors who arrived from Nibiru, traces of their once foreign physiology could exist beneath layers of adaptation imposed by Earth's environment. These echoes would not appear as obvious signs. There would be no single strand identifying a distant world. Instead, they would linger in unusual patterns or redundancies, differences that do not fit neatly within Earth's evolutionary timeline, traits that appear unexpectedly across unrelated populations, biological capabilities that exceed what Earth's environment alone would require, small anomalies, harmless on their own, that point to a broader story. These would be the faint fingerprints left behind by a people shaped by an entirely different set of conditions. One of the clearest forms of such traces could be seen in humanity's adaptability. Humans can thrive in environments ranging from freezing tundras to tropical forests, from high mountains to low deserts. Other Earth-based animals possess impressive adaptability too, but humans display an unusual combination: adaptability paired with intelligence, creativity, tool-making, and long-term planning. This blend is not typical for species arising solely from Earth's natural processes. It suggests a lineage that values survival across diverse conditions, a trait consistent with ancestors shaped by Nibiru's long cycles of extreme climate shifts. On Nibiru, the constant need to prepare for centuries-long cold would foster traits like foresight, resilience, and a strong capacity for problem-solving. These traits would be reinforced biologically over generations through the combination of genetic selection and cultural teaching. If such people arrived on Earth, their descendants might retain these traits even as they adapted to new conditions. The ability to anticipate problems and develop solutions would persist, forming the basis for human civilization's rapid advances. Another potential marker lies in metabolic variability. Humans display a wide range of metabolic responses to food, climate, and physical activity. This flexibility seems broader than what Earth alone would require. A species shaped by long cycles of scarcity and abundance might evolve metabolic pathways capable of shifting between energy conservation and energy expenditure depending on environmental triggers. On Nibiru, such adaptability would be vital, allowing populations to endure extended cold cycles without steady access to sunlight or fresh crops. When these settlers arrived on Earth, their metabolisms might have responded with surprising ease to the new environment. Abundant food sources would activate pathways designed to store nutrients efficiently. Frequent changes in climate would prompt the body to maintain a balanced energy output. Over time, as diets shifted to incorporate Earth's plants and animals, new adaptations would blend with inherited metabolic traits. The result would be a genome containing layers of responses, some shaped by Nibiru's extremes, others by Earth's dynamic ecosystems. Certain immunological traits could also reflect a journey from another world. While Earth's microorganisms shaped most of humanity's immune responses, the earlier settlers might carry patterns developed in environments with entirely different microbial life. Nibiru's ecosystems, shaped by long, cold cycles, might support life forms that behave differently from those on Earth. The settlers' immune systems would adapt to these organisms, developing defences and tolerances that differ from Earth-native patterns. When they arrived here, their immune systems would face unfamiliar challenges but would still retain some structures shaped by earlier encounters. Over generations, as settlers adapted to Earth's microbes, these earlier patterns would not disappear entirely. They would instead become part of a complex immune system capable of responding to an unusually wide range of threats. Human immune responses today demonstrate a flexibility that sometimes surpasses what is typical for mammals of similar size and complexity. While most species evolve immune responses tailored to specific local environments, humans maintain broader patterns that might reflect ancestral conditions, unlike any found on Earth. Genetic markers that seem older than Earth's earliest populations might also reflect this blend. When scientists trace lineages through mitochondrial DNA or through specific chromosomes, they sometimes encounter patterns that do not align neatly with known migrations. These anomalies might result from gaps in the fossil record or from the complexity of human evolution. But they could also represent echoes of a population that arrived from outside Earth entirely, blending with local species or shaping early lineages before recorded history began. Physical traits present in disparate populations could carry similar echoes. Features such as unusual eye shapes, variations in bone density, unique adaptations to altitude or climate, and diverse hair types arose over time through environmental pressures. Yet the speed at which some traits appear, particularly in early humans, exceeds what typical evolutionary processes might produce. A population arriving with its own set of traits could explain the rapid emergence of variation in early human communities. Bone density offers a useful example. Humans differ widely in bone mass, with some populations showing densities more suited to heavier gravity than Earth provides. This variation remains unexplained by environmental factors alone. If Nibiru's gravity differed from Earth's, settlers arriving here might retain traits adapted to their homeworld. Over generations, these traits would diminish as bodies adapted to Earth, but subtle differences could persist in certain lineages. Another potential indicator lies in the brain. Humans possess unusually large brains relative to body size, with complex structures supporting memory, language, planning, and creativity. These features represent immense biological investment. On Earth, such large brains require considerable energy, making them a costly adaptation. Yet humans evolved this capacity more rapidly than expected, according to most evolutionary timelines. A population arriving with advanced cognitive traits shaped by Nibiru's long cycles might explain this speed. Their environment would demand advanced planning, long-term memory, and the ability to maintain knowledge across generations. When such traits entered Earth's population, they would accelerate the development of early civilizations. Memory itself might carry inherited patterns. Humans possess a remarkable ability to store large amounts of information, often structured around events, spatial awareness, and emotional significance. This ability goes beyond simple survival needs. It allows for complex storytelling, historical preservation, and the transmission of knowledge across many generations. A society on Nibiru that depended on memory to survive long, environmental cycles would develop this capability extensively. Their descendants on Earth would inherit both the biological structure and the cultural importance of storytelling. Cultural memory, while not encoded genetically, often reflects biological capacity. The settlers' descendants would have the tools needed to preserve complex histories, rituals, and teachings. When these stories reached later human societies, they would take on mythological significance. Some of these stories might retain hints of Nibiru, descriptions of long cycles, references to a distant cold world, symbols representing orbits or celestial pathways. These echoes appear in some of the oldest human myths, often described as memories of another realm or a time before Earth's earlier civilizations. The human genome also contains segments known as endogenous elements, fragments of DNA that do not match known evolutionary patterns. Some are labelled as non-coding regions, while others appear to originate from unknown sources. While many of these elements result from natural mutations or ancient viral activity, it is possible that a few carry remnants of genetic material introduced by settlers from Nibiru. These remnants would be difficult to identify, buried under millions of years of evolutionary change and interbreeding. Yet they might contribute to unique characteristics found only in humans. Adaptation to Earth's sunlight offers another clue. Humans possess a wide range of skin pigmentation, influenced by ancestry, environment, and exposure to ultraviolet radiation. This variation developed quickly as populations migrated across different climates. Yet the settlers' original world might have had drastically different light levels. If Nibiru's sunlight was weaker during long portions of its orbit, the earlier settlers might have carried traits suited for low-light environments. These traits would shift once exposed to Earth's stronger sunlight, leading to rapid adaptation. Over time, pigmentation diversified in ways that reflect both inherited traits and environmental influence. The structure of human sleep cycles might also reflect ancestral patterns. Humans exhibit circadian rhythms aligned with Earth's 24-hour cycle, yet many individuals display flexibility in these rhythms. Some adapt easily to night shifts, long days, or extended wakefulness. Others adjust quickly after crossing time zones. A species shaped by long cycles of light and dark on Nibiru might carry a biological capacity for flexible sleep patterns. Over generations, this flexibility would help settlers adapt to Earth's rapid day-night transitions. Another echo in the genome lies in the resilience of human reproduction. Humans have longer developmental periods than most Earth species, requiring extended care from parents and communities. This trait fosters social complexity and generational continuity. On Nibiru, where conditions change slowly across centuries, long-term parental investment would be critical for passing knowledge across generations. The settlers' descendants might retain these traits, forming early human societies that rely on cooperation, shared caregiving, and collective memory. Even emotional structures might carry faint traces of Nibiru's influence. Humans experience a wide range of emotions, including empathy, curiosity, anxiety, resilience, and hope. These emotions support complex social networks and long-term planning. On Nibiru, where survival demanded cooperation across large communities and careful preparation for future cycles, emotional intelligence would be essential. The ability to form strong social bonds, support communal efforts, and plan for future generations would ensure survival through long cold periods. These traits, inherited by early humans, might contribute to the cooperative nature of early human societies. Some of the most intriguing genetic echoes come from traits with no clear evolutionary necessity. Humans excel at symbolic thinking, artistic expression, and abstract reasoning. These capabilities surpass what is required for basic survival. On Nibiru, a culture shaped by slow cycles and long-term thinking might develop symbolic systems to preserve knowledge. Over time, symbols could become integrated into the genome through epigenetic influences, affecting cognitive development in subtle ways. When these settlers arrived on Earth, their descendants would inherit an innate tendency towards symbolic creation, influencing the development of language, art, and spirituality. Epigenetics adds another layer to this story. Environmental pressures can alter gene expression across generations without changing DNA sequences. On Nibiru, long cycles of cold, scarcity, and environmental variation would shape epigenetic markers that influence metabolism, stress responses, and cognitive function. When the settlers arrived on Earth, these markers might persist for generations, affecting how their descendants adapted to new environments. Over time, Earth's environment would shape new epigenetic patterns, blending with the settlers' inherited traits to create a complex, layered identity. As human populations spread across Earth, these blended traits diversified further. Diets changed, climates varied, social structures shifted, Every new environment left its own mark on the genome. Over thousands of years, the original Nibiruan traits would become subtle, almost invisible. Yet echoes remain in human adaptability, cognitive complexity, immune flexibility, and variation across populations. They persist as faint reminders that humanity did not simply emerge in isolation, but evolved through a process shaped by both Earth's environment and the heritage of those who first arrived. These subtle traces continue into the next stage of this journey, where early myths, symbols, and structures reflect memories carried not only in stories, but in the deeper layers of identity passed through generations. As the descendants of Nibiru spread across Earth, their memories changed shape. What began as clear accounts of a journey across the void slowly softened into stories meant to teach, guide, and comfort. Over generations, these stories intertwined with new experiences, merging with the landscapes, animals, and seasons of Earth. The result was a woven heritage where elements of a distant world blended with the everyday life of early humans. Even as the original details faded, the echoes remained, carried forward through temples, structures, symbols, and myths that reflected the earliest settlers' attempts to preserve fragments of their past. The first temples would not look like the vast stone monuments seen in later civilizations. They would begin as simple gathering places, areas where families came together to share memory, pass down teachings, and mark important events in the cycle of seasons. These places might be defined by natural markers, such as distinctive trees, flat stones, or hills that held a clear view of the sky. For the settlers' descendants, the sky served as both a reminder of where their ancestors came from and a guide for understanding Earth's new environment. As they learned to read Earth's stars, they incorporated these readings into stories that mixed inherited knowledge with observations of the new world. Over time, these simple gathering places evolved into more structured spaces. Stones were arranged in circles or lines to mark paths of the sun or the changing positions of stars. The settlers' descendants noticed that Earth's sky held patterns that repeated consistently, unlike the slow, sweeping cycles of Nibiru. The shorter year meant that constellations shifted predictably across the seasons. Recording these movements allowed communities to track time, predict weather, and organize agricultural activities. The knowledge brought from Nibiru, used to interpret a different sky, gave their descendants an advantage in understanding Earth's cycles quickly. Stone arrangements eventually grew into more elaborate structures. Communities placed large stones upright, aligned with solstices or equinoxes. These structures were not only practical tools for tracking time, but also physical representations of memory. Each stone, carved or placed with intention, symbolized the settler's connection to the sky. Even when the people no longer remembered the technical reasons behind these alignments, they felt a connection to something ancient, rooted in the stories passed down through generations. These early temples reflected a blend of practicality and symbolism, grounded in daily life yet carrying echoes of a past that stretched beyond Earth. As communities grew, myths evolved alongside these structures. Myths are not mere stories. They are vessels for memory, shaped across generations to reflect the experiences, fears, and hopes of a people. In the case of the settlers' descendants, myths served as the bridge between Nibiru's distant past and Earth's unfolding present. The earliest myths likely retained more of the original story. They might have described ancestors arriving from the sky in vessels guided by knowledge of stars. They might have mentioned a world with long cycles of cold and brief intervals of warmth. They might have included details about the journey, the landing, and the early days of settlement. But as generations passed, the stories changed. With each retelling, the language simplified. Children learned the stories through metaphors and images that fit their understanding. Parents emphasized themes of resilience, cooperation, and survival. Grandparents focused on broader lessons rather than technical details. Over time, the original descriptions of engines, orbit calculations, and life support systems faded. What remained were images of glowing ships, beings who descended in light, and ancestors who came from a world beyond the sky. These images appear in myths across cultures. Some speak of sky beings who arrived in bright craft, descending slowly into valleys or onto mountains. Others describe visitors who brought tools, seeds, or knowledge. Still others mention gods who taught early humans how to plant crops, build riverside settlements, or track the stars. These stories might reflect memories of the settlers' early interactions with Earth's environment. As advanced tools broke down over time, communities preserved their memory through symbolic descriptions. A device used to shape metal might become a gift from a skyborn visitor. A lesson on agricultural cycles might become a command from a god who descended in radiant form. Many myths share a recurring theme, the idea that knowledge came from the sky. Whether described as gifts from gods, teachings from celestial beings, or inherited skills passed down from ancestors who arrived from above, these stories reflect a deep connection between early humans and the sky. This connection did not arise spontaneously. It emerged from the settlers' original understanding of the sky as a guide for survival. When their descendants lost the technical knowledge behind this connection, the symbolic significance remained. The sky became a source of wisdom, inspiration, and authority. Temples reflected this connection physically. Many early structures across Earth show alignments with celestial events. These alignments are strikingly precise, suggesting an advanced understanding of astronomy among early builders. While Earth's early humans were intelligent and observant, such precise alignments might indicate inherited knowledge passed down from ancestors who once relied on detailed sky mapping for survival. Structures aligned with solstices, lunar cycles, or specific stars might reflect memories of Nibiru's slow orbit, encoded into architecture as a way to preserve continuity. Some temples incorporate symbols that resemble patterns not commonly associated with Earth's environment. Spirals, concentric circles, intersecting lines, and other geometric shapes appear repeatedly across ancient structures and artifacts. These shapes could reflect memories of orbital paths, celestial crossings, or energy cycles from Nibiru. Even if their meaning was forgotten, their use persisted because they held significance within the cultural framework inherited from the settlers. Over generations, these symbols evolved into artistic motifs, religious icons, or magical diagrams. They became part of Earth's cultural landscape without revealing their original purpose. As myths developed, they incorporated local elements. In regions with abundant sunlight, myths emphasized sun gods who brought warmth and life. In colder climates, myths focused on sky beings who protected communities through long winters. As descendants of settlers spread across landscapes, their stories adapted to new surroundings. They blended inherited tales with new experiences, creating mythologies that reflected both memory and environment. Over time, these stories became foundations for entire cultures. Some myths mention a time before Earth's earliest civilizations, when beings arrived from the sky and taught humans how to build. These beings often appear in groups, suggesting communities rather than lone visitors. Their descriptions sometimes include advanced clothing or tools, which early humans interpreted through their own understanding. A protective suit might be described as shining armor. A breathing apparatus might be seen as a mask granting supernatural power. A communication device might be described as a staff that transmitted commands. As these stories passed through generations, their symbolic meaning grew stronger, while the technical meaning faded. The settlers' descendants also developed rituals tied to these stories. Rituals served as a way to preserve memory through action. Reciting myths, performing dances, or engaging in symbolic ceremonies allowed communities to reinforce their connection to the skyborn past. Some rituals celebrated the arrival of ancestors. Others marked seasonal changes or celestial events. Still others honoured specific deities representing aspects of memory, knowledge, or protection. Even when the original purpose of these rituals faded, the emotional significance persisted. rituals gave structure to life, guiding communities through cycles of birth, harvest, and renewal. In some cultures, priests or shamans served as keepers of memory. They learned stories, symbols, and rituals passed down through families or communities. Their role was to preserve and interpret knowledge, ensuring that the connection to the sky remained alive. Over time, these individuals gained authority, shaping the spiritual and cultural identity of their people. Their teachings often emphasized the importance of the sky, the stars, and the cycle of seasons. Echoes of the settlers' continued dependence on celestial patterns. Temples grew into larger structures as civilizations advanced. Builders used stone, clay, wood, and metal to create permanent spaces dedicated to memory, protection, or worship. Some temples incorporated underground chambers, symbolizing the long periods of cold or darkness experienced on Nibiru. Others included open-air courtyards aligned with the path of the sun or the phases of the moon. Towers or elevated platforms allowed observers to study the sky, continuing the settlers' early practices of astronomical tracking. Across continents, these structures share themes. Pyramids, mounds, circles, and towers appear in diverse cultures with no direct contact. This repetition suggests either a common origin or a shared need. If the settlers' descendants influenced early human communities broadly, they might have carried architectural ideas with them, shaped by both inherited memory and practical needs. A pyramid, for example, provides stability when built with large stones. It also echoes the shape of structures that might have existed on Nibiru, or that the settlers used as symbols of cosmic order. Whether those shapes reflected literal structures or abstract ideas, they found new life in Earth's early civilizations. Myths transformed further as societies grew more complex. Kings and rulers sometimes claimed descent from sky beings, using these claims to legitimize their authority. This practice reflects an older idea, that those who preserved knowledge from the settlers held responsibility for guiding communities. As stories evolved, this responsibility became tied to leadership, linking earthly power with celestial origin. Over centuries, this connection became a central theme in myths about divine kingship, chosen rulers, and sacred bloodlines. Some myths describe cycles of destruction and renewal, reflecting the settlers' memory of Nibiru's long orbital cycles. Stories of floods, fires, or great darkness followed by rebirth might echo the environmental transitions experienced by ancestors. These stories gained new meaning on Earth, integrating with local experiences of natural disasters or climate changes. But their structure might originate in memories of a world where environmental cycles shaped life profoundly over centuries. Symbols carved into early temples often represent duality, light and dark, warm and cold above and below. This duality reflects the settlers' experience of living between extremes on Nibiru. Their descendants, even without understanding the original context, preserved these symbols because they resonated culturally. Over time, duality became a central theme in many religions and mythologies. It symbolized balance, transformation, and the cyclical nature of existence. Other symbols represent paths or crossings. These symbols appear in myths describing journeys between worlds, transitions from life to death, or the boundary between the mortal world and the divine. They might reflect the settler's journey through space, or the crossing of Nibiru's orbit through different regions of the solar system. As these symbols became integrated into Earth's cultures, their meaning expanded, shaping interpretations of travel, transformation, and spiritual journeys. As generations passed, the memories embedded in these myths and symbols became more distant. Descendants of settlers blended with local populations, creating new cultural identities shaped by Earth's landscapes. Knowledge of the journey from Nibiru became symbolic, then mythological. But the echoes remained. Temples aligned with stars, stories about sky beings, symbols representing cycles, crossings, and paths. rituals marking the movement of celestial bodies. These elements reflect a deep-rooted heritage that cannot be traced solely to Earth's environment. Even in modern times, the fascination with the sky persists. People look upward to find meaning, inspiration, or reassurance. This fascination might be another echo shaped by the memory of ancestors who once lived on a world where the sky determined survival. Even though the original context is long forgotten, the connection remains strong enough to influence art, architecture, spirituality, and storytelling across cultures. These echoes, preserved through temples, myths, and symbols, lead naturally into the next stage of this unfolding story, where early civilizations began building entire worlds of knowledge around what they inherited, blending memory with new experiences as humanity continued to grow. As human societies expanded across continents, building villages, cities, and networks of trade, a curious pattern unfolded in many places at once. Different cultures, separated by oceans, mountains, deserts, and thousands of years, developed stories insisting that humanity's beginnings were not rooted solely in the soil beneath their feet. Instead, these cultures described ancestors who came from above. They spoke of beings who descended from the sky, taught essential knowledge, shaped early society, or even formed the first humans. These stories appeared among peoples who shared no contact, who did not exchange traditions, and who faced vastly different environments. Yet the idea that humanity came from the stars persisted, repeating itself across time and geography with a consistency that stands out even after the original meaning was softened by generations of retelling. This pattern could be a cultural coincidence, but it might also reflect a shared memory preserved unconsciously through millennia. If the earliest settlers from Nibiru blended with emerging human groups, their descendants would carry stories of a skyborne past into every region they inhabited. As these peoples developed their own identities, they adapted inherited stories to fit their landscapes, their rhythms, and their spiritual beliefs. The original details faded, but the central idea remained strong, that the origins of humanity were not limited to Earth. Different civilizations expressed this memory through structures, rituals, and beliefs that pointed upward. In some places, entire architectural traditions grew around this impulse. Builders created monuments designed to draw the eye toward the sky. Temples, pyramids, ziggurats, and towers rose above the landscape, emphasizing the vertical connection between Earth and the heavens. These structures served practical purposes, centers for study, ceremony, or governance. But their design reflected an older instinct, to maintain the link between the people and the sky. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, ziggurats were constructed as layered platforms rising toward the heavens. These structures were not simple fortresses or decorative mounds. They were designed with steps or ramps that allowed priests to ascend toward the sky, reinforcing the idea that knowledge, guidance, or messages might come from above. The stories associated with these temples describe gods who descended from the sky to interact with humans. These gods often arrived in radiant or fiery forms, suggesting echoes of vessels or technologies reinterpreted through symbolic language. The culture saw these beings as teachers who imparted skills such as agriculture, writing, and governance. If early settlers from Nibiru taught these skills to the communities they encountered, later generations would preserve these teachings as divine instruction. Far to the west, in the Andes, the Inca civilization developed its own upward-focused architecture and mythology. The Inca revered beings who descended from the sky, describing them as ancestors who provided knowledge and guidance. Their temples were often constructed on high mountains or elevated plateaus, as close as possible to the heavens. The Inca believed that their founders were children of the sun, sent from the sky to unite and guide humanity. This belief shaped their governance, rituals, and daily life. Even when interpreted symbolically, the story reflects the idea of origins beyond Earth. Similar patterns appear in Egypt. The pyramids of Giza, aligned precisely with stars and planetary cycles, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the sky. Egyptians told stories of early rulers who descended from celestial realms before the first dynasties were established. They believed their pharaohs were linked to the heavens, representing a lineage that extended beyond Earth. Their deities were often depicted descending from the sky or travelling through it in vessels described as boats of light. The blending of astronomy, architecture and mythology in Egypt suggests a deep-rooted need to preserve a connection with origins tied to the sky. In Greece, myths told of gods who lived on mountaintops or travelled between realms. These gods possessed advanced knowledge, weapons that harnessed natural forces, and abilities that humans could not replicate. The stories describe interactions between gods and humans that shape civilization. While heavily symbolic, the consistent theme of skyborne beings offering guidance might trace back to memories carried from a distant world. Over time, Greek culture blended these ideas into myths that prioritized narrative and moral lessons, but the original connection to the sky persisted. In ancient China, early dynastic stories describe rulers known as the Sons of Heaven. Their authority came from a celestial mandate, indicating a belief that leadership originated from the sky. Legends include celestial visitors, luminous beings, and teachers who imparted wisdom about agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and governance. Chinese societies developed architecture, such as tiered pagodas, that rose upward in layers, echoing structures built in other regions for the same symbolic purpose. Their early calendars tracked celestial movements with remarkable accuracy, suggesting that inherited knowledge influenced their approach to time and seasons. Across the Pacific and Polynesia, stories describe navigators who are guided by beings from the sky or by ancestors who travelled through the stars. These cultures developed exceptional knowledge of astronomy, using star patterns to navigate long distances across the ocean. Their myths often mention star paths, cosmic journeys, and origins connected to distant realms. These stories could reflect the settlers' early use of celestial navigation, translated into cultural practices enduring through generations. In the indigenous cultures of North America, many tribes tell stories of sky people who visited Earth, interacted with early humans, and shared knowledge. These stories vary widely, reflecting the diversity of the continent's cultures, but many include descriptions of beings descending in objects described as clouds, fire, or thunder. Some tribes describe their ancestors as coming from the stars, sent by beings who live beyond Earth. These stories, preserved through oral tradition, emphasize the significance of the sky as a source of origins and identity. In Africa, numerous cultures preserve stories of beings who descended to teach humans how to farm, build, or organize societies. Some traditions describe luminous beings who arrived in flying objects, or who came from star clusters viewed as sacred. These stories sometimes connect to rituals that emphasize the sky, such as dances tracing celestial patterns, or ceremonies performed during specific astronomical events. The idea that humanity's beginnings involved visitors from the sky appears across cultures with no direct contact with each other, reinforcing the possibility of a shared memory. These stories might reflect memories of real events, interpreted through symbolic language as generations passed. These settlers' descendants, living in communities influenced by both inherited memory and Earth's environment, would teach their children about their origins using the best words available. As concepts became simplified, the original meaning transformed. A vessel became a chariot or a cloud. A protective suit became shining armor. A landing sequence became a descent in fire. Over time, these descriptions formed entire mythologies. Temples and ceremonial complexes reflect these stories in physical form. Many structures incorporate elements aligned with the sky. For example, Stonehenge in Britain aligns with solstices and lunar cycles. Its builders may have used inherited knowledge of astronomical patterns to track time or predict environmental changes. While Stonehenge predates written records, Its alignment suggests an understanding of celestial events that might trace back to the settlers' early teachings. In Central America, the Maya and Aztec civilizations built pyramids aligned with specific stars, planets, and solar events. Their myths describe gods who descended from the sky to create humans or to teach essential skills. The precision of their astronomical knowledge stands out sharply. They developed calendars tracking celestial cycles with accuracy far exceeding what their environment alone would demand. Such knowledge could originate from teachings preserved through generations, adapted from systems used on Nibiru to track long orbital cycles. Nearby, in the Andean region, structures like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman incorporate alignments with the sun and stars. The precision of these alignments reveals a deep connection between architecture and the sky. These structures also include monumental stonework that suggests an advanced understanding of engineering principles, possibly reflecting techniques preserved from the settlers' early building practices. In India, myths speak of beings who arrived in flying vehicles described in later texts with detailed specifications. These stories include descriptions of battles fought in the sky, advanced technologies, and cities inhabited by beings from other realms. While these accounts are symbolic, they preserve themes that echo the settlers' stories of a journey across space. Indian architecture often includes towers or spires reaching toward the sky, reflecting the symbolic connection to celestial realms. In Australia, Indigenous peoples share Dreamtime stories describing creation events that involve beings arriving from the sky or transforming the landscape from above. These stories are among the oldest preserved oral traditions on Earth. They reflect a worldview where the sky holds spiritual and practical significance. The precision with which these communities map the sky suggests inherited knowledge used to track seasons, migrations, and natural cycles. In many of these cultures, the sky is not simply a background for stories, it is a central part of identity. It represents memory, origin, authority, and continuity. This emphasis might reflect the settlers' reliance on celestial observation for survival on Nibiru. Their descendants preserved this emphasis through rituals, stories, architecture, and social structures. Even when the original meaning faded, the importance of the sky persisted. Some cultures went further than symbolic interpretation. They claimed direct descent from beings who came from the stars. These claims appear across continents, suggesting that humans recognize differences, perhaps in knowledge, appearance, or abilities, among early individuals or groups. The settlers' initial presence might have created distinct lineages that later communities remembered as separate or elevated. Over time, these memories transformed into myths about divine bloodlines or celestial ancestry. Even as civilizations grew more complex, these beliefs did not disappear. Ancient leaders often used symbols linking themselves to the sky. Crowns, headpieces, and regalia frequently included elements associated with celestial bodies. Sun disks, star patterns, and lunar symbols show up in artifacts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and many other regions. These symbols emphasized a ruler's connection to the heavens, reinforcing the belief that authority or wisdom came from above. Religious ceremonies often took place at dawn, dusk, or during solstices. These moments marked transitions in the sky that carried symbolic significance. They represented new beginnings, endings, or shifts in the cycle of time. Such rituals might reflect the settlers' memory of Nibiru's extended cycles, translated into Earth's much faster rhythms. Celebrating these transitions helped preserve the idea that the sky influenced life on Earth. In some cultures, temples served as observatories. Priests or astronomers studied the sky to predict seasonal changes or natural events. Their understanding of celestial cycles sometimes exceeded what could be expected from direct observation alone. Families trained in this knowledge passed it down through generations, preserving techniques that may have originated with the settlers' early guidance. These traditions, shared across diverse cultures, suggest that humanity's fascination with the sky is not purely symbolic. It carries the weight of memory, a quiet echo of origins that trace back further than written history. The stories, structures, and rituals reflect a worldview shaped by people who once looked at the sky, not only for spiritual meaning but for survival. Their descendants inherited this instinct, preserving it in ways that adapted to their own environments. As civilizations continued to develop, this sky-focused heritage branched into different directions. Some cultures emphasize celestial wisdom. Others use sky myths to explain natural phenomena. Still others built monumental structures to anchor their stories physically. The diversity of these expressions reflects the blend of inherited memory and local adaptation. Even when the original context faded, the impulse remained. These upward-pointing civilizations set the stage for the next part of this story, where the influence of Nibiru's settlers shaped early science, architecture, and belief in ways that carried into the foundations of later cultures, guiding humanity toward a deeper understanding of its place in the universe. As humanity grew into a world shaped by civilizations that looked upward for meaning, the stories of a skyborn origin lingered in ways that surprised generations of thinkers. These stories existed in temples, myths, symbols, and entire cultural landscapes, but they also existed in the edges of curiosity. Scholars, priests, and early philosophers tried to understand why so many cultures insisted that their beginnings lay beyond the sky. Their interpretations ranged from spiritual to symbolic to literal. Over time, these interpretations evolved into entire systems of knowledge, and with each new era, scientists and skeptics offered explanations that reflected the tools and understanding available to them. When early civilizations began building records rather than relying solely on oral tradition, these sky-based stories were written down. In Sumer, scribes carved tales of beings who descended from the heavens to teach and guide humanity. In Egypt, priests recorded stories linking pharaohs to celestial origins. In Greece, thinkers debated the roles of gods who travelled between worlds. These stories did not appear in isolation. They emerged from communities shaped by both environment and inherited memory. Even when the original meaning was diluted, the core idea persisted strongly enough to become a part of written history. Over time, scholars tried to interpret these records. Some viewed them as symbolic expressions of human imagination. Others believed they reflected natural phenomena reinterpreted through myth. A few suggested that these stories might preserve real events, interpreted through cultural filters. As societies advanced and literacy spread, interpretations became more diverse. Historians examined texts, archaeologists studied ruins, and astronomers mapped the sky. Through these approaches, humanity built the foundations of academic inquiry. The earliest scientists, working with limited tools, attempted to explain sky-based myths by linking them with observable phenomena. Eclipses, comets, meteor showers, and planetary movements became common explanations for stories of gods descending from the sky. While these explanations fit some narratives, others remained resistant to interpretation. The consistent theme of visitors, teachers, or ancestors arriving from above did not align neatly with natural events. Yet scholars trained in Earth-based perspectives focused on explanations that kept the sky distant and symbolic. Centuries later, as scientific methods grew more refined, new discoveries shaped the conversation. Advances in astronomy revealed the vastness of space and the possibility of planets beyond Earth, though early telescopes could not confirm these distant worlds. Even so, the recognition that Earth was not the centre of the universe shifted the mental landscape of science. If Earth was simply one planet among many, then the stories describing visitors from the sky gained a different context. They were no longer tied to a universe assumed to revolve around humanity. Yet skepticism remained a central force. As science developed, it anchored itself in empirical observation, testable theories, and repeatable results. Stories of skyborne origins did not fit neatly into these frameworks. Scholars understood myths as cultural artifacts, shaped by imagination, environment, and social needs. They studied patterns across cultures, identifying common symbols and themes. Many concluded that stories of skyborne ancestors served to legitimize authority or explain the unknown. Even when similarities appeared in regions far apart, skeptics attributed the pattern to the universal human tendency to look upward for meaning. These interpretations did not erase the stories, they simply reframed them. In doing so, skeptics played a role in preserving the past. By recording myths, examining symbols, and cataloguing structures aligned with the sky, they created a foundation for later scholars to revisit these ideas with new tools. When new discoveries challenged established theories, these records became invaluable. As scientific understanding grew, skepticism shifted. In the age of exploration, researchers encountered cultures unfamiliar to European scholars. Many of these cultures preserved stories of skyborne origins. Explorers recorded these stories, often without understanding their depth. Some dismissed them as superstition, others saw them as evidence of universal human imagination. A few recognized patterns too consistent to ignore, though they lacked the framework to interpret them meaningfully. The rise of modern science introduced new perspectives. Archaeology revealed ancient structures built with precision that surprised researchers. Astronomical alignments, advanced engineering techniques, and cross-cultural similarities raised questions. Skeptics offered explanations based on trade, migration, or coincidence. Scientists examined construction methods, proposing that complex projects could be achieved without advanced tools. These explanations were thorough, rooted in evidence, and grounded in the desire to keep interpretations within known parameters. Even so, some mysteries remained unresolved. How did early builders understand astronomical cycles with such precision? How did they move massive stones across long distances? How did similar structures appear across cultures with no known contact? Skeptics acknowledged these questions but sought explanations within Earth-based frameworks. Their work ensured that interpretations did not lean too far into speculation. In parallel, scientists studying human origins examined fossils, DNA, and geological evidence. They traced humanity's development across regions and time periods. Their findings revealed a complex story of migration, adaptation, and evolution. Within these discoveries, certain anomalies appeared: genetic markers without clear origins, physiological traits that did not align neatly with known environmental pressures, and rapid developments in cognition. Skeptics interpreted these anomalies as natural variations, while other thinkers considered whether deeper explanations were possible. As genetics advanced, new questions emerged. Researchers discovered that human DNA contained segments not found in other species, or whose origins were difficult to identify. Some of these segments appeared ancient, predating known migrations. Others seemed to emerge abruptly rather than gradually. Skeptics worked to interpret these findings through established theories. They proposed mutation, genetic drift, or interbreeding with unknown hominins. These explanations held merit, but they did not resolve every inconsistency. Throughout these developments, a quiet space existed between scientific certainty and mythic memory. In this space, hypotheses formed, ideas not easily proven or disproven. Some researchers speculated about panspermia, the concept that life could have originated elsewhere and arrived on Earth through natural mechanisms. Others considered whether ancient humans might have encountered beings from elsewhere. These ideas remained controversial, and skeptics played a necessary role in ensuring that claims remained grounded in evidence. Yet skepticism, when balanced with open inquiry, becomes a tool for exploration rather than denial. Many scientists acknowledge that humanity does not fully understand its origins. They recognize that gaps remain in the fossil record, that genetic anomalies exist, and that early human development occurred more rapidly than expected. These mysteries inspired new theories. though only a few touched upon the possibility of an off-world influence. In modern times, researchers studying ancient civilizations began to explore whether stories of skyborne origins carried symbolic meaning or preserved literal memories interpreted through generations of retelling. This perspective did not dismiss scientific evidence. Instead, it expanded the range of possible interpretations. If early humans inherited stories from ancestors who arrived on Earth, these stories might survive as fragments scattered across myths. They would not appear as clear accounts, but as echoes shaped by culture, memory, and environment. Anthropologists studying mythic structures found that stories of skyborne origins appear in cultures with no shared language or history. These stories often describe visitors arriving in vehicles, bringing knowledge and guiding early communities. Skeptics argue that such stories reflect humanity's tendency to personify natural phenomena, but the consistency across geography and time raises questions that cannot be dismissed easily. Linguists examining ancient texts discovered symbols and phrases that hint at origins beyond Earth. These texts describe journeys, celestial realms, and beings who travelled between worlds. While symbolic language complicates interpretation, some elements appear strikingly specific. Skeptics analyse these texts through cultural lenses, but others suggest that they might reflect inherited memory rather than pure invention. Archaeologists studying early structures found alignments with celestial bodies that exceed what would be expected from trial and error. Temples facing solstices, monuments aligned with star clusters, and buildings designed to track lunar cycles demonstrate advanced understanding. Skeptics propose that such knowledge arose from careful observation, while others suggest it might reflect inherited practices passed down from a people who depended on celestial navigation. In fields such as astrophysics and planetary science, the possibility of distant planetary bodies influenced discussions about Nibiru-like worlds. While no definitive evidence supports the existence of such a world in the modern solar system, the concept remains scientifically plausible under certain models. Skeptics caution against drawing conclusions without data, but they acknowledge that the universe contains countless planets beyond our current scope of observation. The silence between theories, where neither science nor mythology provides a complete answer, is where the possibility of a skyborne origin resides. This silence is not emptiness. It is a space shaped by gaps in evidence, limits in technology, and memories blurred by time. It is a space where ancient stories and modern questions intersect quietly, without the need for dramatic claims. In this silence, scientists continue their work. They analyse samples, compare fossils, map genomes, and build models that reconstruct the past. Skeptics continue to question, ensuring that theories remain grounded. Together, they create a balanced approach, one that values caution without dismissing possibility. This balance allows humanity to explore ideas beyond the horizon of current understanding, while maintaining respect for evidence. As research progresses, more data emerges. Genetic studies reveal unexpected connections between populations. Archaeological discoveries uncover structures older than previously thought. Astronomical observations expand knowledge of distant worlds. Each piece contributes to a broader picture, but many pieces remain missing. The silence persists, inviting curiosity without offering easy answers. Humanity stands between the stories of ancient civilizations and the tools of modern science. In this space, the idea of a skyborne origin remains neither proven nor disproven. It exists as a thread woven through memory, myth, and possibility. It persists because it speaks to something deep within human identity, not as fantasy, but as a quiet question beneath the surface of understanding. This balance between curiosity and caution continues into the next part of the story, where humanity's search for meaning blends with inherited memory and the structures built to explore what lies beyond, shaping the final stages of how the past informs the path forward. As the story of humanity unfolded across continents and centuries, the traces of a skyborne origin never fully disappeared. They remained in architecture, in myths, in symbols, and in the deeply rooted instinct to look upward for meaning. Even as cultures evolved and civilizations rose and fell, the memory held its shape quietly, carried through rituals and repeated in stories told to generations who no longer understood their original purpose. At the same time, science advanced, building tools to measure, analyze, and explain the natural world. Between these two forces, myth and measurement, humanity found itself standing in a space where imagination meets evidence, where inherited memory meets data, and where the past reveals itself in ways that neither storytelling nor science can claim alone. The idea that humanity might be an imported species is not one that developed suddenly. It surfaced gradually, shaped by the convergence of patterns that did not fully align with traditional explanations. These patterns appeared in ancient structures built with precision beyond their eras, in memories preserved through oral traditions, in genetic anomalies that resisted simple classification, and in the similarities among myths from cultures separated by vast distances. Each pattern alone could be interpreted in many ways. Together, they formed a picture that prompted deeper reflection. Scientists studying human origins have long focused on fossils, artifacts, and environmental data. They trace the development of early hominins, analyze bone structures, compare skull shapes, and examine the progression of tool use. These studies reveal remarkable stories of adaptation, migration, and survival. They show how early humans evolved to fit environments ranging from African savannas to European forests. They demonstrate how climate shifts influence population movements and how genetic diversity emerged over thousands of years. Within this framework, humanity appears firmly rooted in Earth's natural processes. Yet this framework does not answer every question. Certain leaps in human development occur too quickly to fit neatly into the timeline of slow evolutionary change. For example, the rapid expansion of the human brain took place over a period that, in geological terms, is brief. The emergence of complex language, symbolic thinking, and advanced toolmaking occurred with surprising speed. While evolutionary biology offers explanations involving environmental pressure and genetic mutation, some researchers note that the scale and speed of these changes are unusual when compared to other species. The question then becomes how to interpret these leaps. Some view them as natural expressions of evolution. Others see them as signs of influence, whether environmental, biological, or possibly external. If early humans inherited traits from settlers who arrived from Nibiru, these leaps would align with the blending of two populations, one shaped by Earth's environment, the other by the long cycles of a distant world. The combination could produce rapid changes in cognition, memory, and adaptability. Over generations, these changes would stabilize, creating a species capable of complex thought, creativity, and cooperation. Genetic studies reveal another layer of complexity. Within human DNA lie segments that do not align easily with known evolutionary patterns. Some researchers describe these segments as ancient, predating the expected timelines for certain migrations or genetic splits. Others note elements that appear abruptly rather than gradually, suggesting either sudden mutation or introduction from an external source. While mainstream science interprets these findings through known mechanisms, the possibility remains that these anomalies reflect remnants of an origin that included influences not native to Earth. For example, certain genes associated with brain development, immune function, or metabolic response appear highly specialized. They provide advantages in diverse environments and support human adaptability in ways that exceed what Earth's natural pressures alone would require. If the earlier settlers from Nibiru possessed traits shaped by a world of extremes, their descendants would inherit genetic patterns honed for resilience. These patterns, blended with Earth's evolutionary heritage, could explain why humans display an unusual capacity to thrive across varied ecosystems. Another line of inquiry involves cultural development. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans created structures, tools and art far earlier than once believed. Recent discoveries reveal societies capable of organized building, agriculture, and symbolic expression long before the development of large civilizations. These early achievements suggest that humans possessed advanced cognitive abilities earlier than expected, raising questions about where these abilities originated. If early humans inherited knowledge or memory from settlers, this inherited capacity could help explain the advanced nature of early cultural expressions. Myths across cultures describe similar themes: sky beings arriving to guide humanity, teachers from above imparting knowledge, visitors who brought skills related to agriculture, architecture, or astronomy. These stories vary in detail but maintain consistent structures. Scholars interpret them symbolically, seeing in them reflections of natural phenomena or psychological archetypes. Yet the consistency across distant cultures suggests a shared memory rather than isolated invention. In societies with no contact, these stories appear in strikingly similar forms. South American cultures describe creators who came from the sky. African stories speak of visitors who taught early humans essential skills. Asian traditions mention beings descending from celestial realms to guide civilization. European myths portray gods who interacted with humanity from elevated realms. These stories may reflect inherited memories shaped by the earlier settlers' arrival on Earth. Over time, these memories transformed into myths tailored to local cultures, but the core idea remained intact. The question arises of how these memories could persist for so long. Oral traditions can preserve details across generations, especially when stories become tied to rituals, ceremonies, or social identity. Even when details blur, the central themes endure. If the earliest humans learned about their origins from settlers, they would pass these stories down as part of their cultural identity. As generations grew further removed from direct contact, the stories shifted from memory to myth. Yet the essential idea that humanity came from the sky remained firmly embedded in cultural narratives. Measurement provides another avenue for exploration. When scientists examine ancient structures, they find alignments with celestial events that exceed the needs of early societies. For example, many ancient temples align precisely with solstices, equinoxes, or specific stars. These alignments require knowledge of astronomical patterns that take long periods to observe. The question then becomes how early societies acquired this knowledge. Skeptics argue for careful observation over generations. Supporters of the imported origin theory propose that inherited knowledge from settlers might explain how early humans learned to align structures so accurately with celestial phenomena. The accuracy of these alignments is significant. Monuments in Egypt, Mesoamerica, Europe, and Asia demonstrate understanding of cycles that would require long-term observation, far beyond the lifespans of individuals in early communities. If the settlers relied on celestial navigation to survive Nibiru's long orbit, they would have preserved methods for tracking stars, measuring time, and predicting celestial events. Their descendants, inheriting fragments of this knowledge, could apply it to Earth's sky. Even when the original context faded, the methods remained valuable for agriculture, ritual, and navigation. Another form of measurement involves the analysis of environmental changes. Scientists studying climate patterns, geological shifts, and population movements can reconstruct the conditions faced by early humans. These reconstructions show how harsh environments shaped human adaptability. Yet they also reveal periods where human progress outpaced environmental demands. For example, early advances in agriculture occurred in regions where natural conditions did not immediately require such development. This suggests a proactive approach to survival rather than a reactive one. If settlers possessed agricultural knowledge from Nibiru, they might apply it early, influencing human development long before environmental pressure made it necessary. The blending of myth and measurement appears again in the study of symbolic systems. Early humans created symbols, carvings, and markings whose meaning remains debated. Some resemble celestial maps. Others appear to represent cycles, pathways, or alignments. Scholars interpret these symbols through various lenses, but if the settlers passed down knowledge of Nibiru cycles, early humans might encode these ideas into symbols. Over time, the meaning of these symbols would shift as cultures adapted them to local contexts, but the structure would persist. Language offers another field of study. Some linguistic patterns appear older than expected, with roots that span across regions in ways that defy simple migration models. While language evolves rapidly, certain elements remain surprisingly stable. These elements might reflect inherited linguistic structures from the settlers. Even if early humans adapted their language to Earth's environment, some underlying patterns might persist, shaping the development of grammar, syntax, or symbolic expression. While science offers many tools to explore humanity's past, limitations remain. Fossil records are incomplete. Genetic data tell only part of the story. Archaeological findings depend on preservation conditions. Myths evolve through retelling. These limitations create gaps where certainty is difficult. These gaps form the space between myth and measurement, a space where interpretations emerge that reflect both evidence and possibility. In this space, the idea of humanity as an imported species remains neither fully supported nor fully dismissed. It stands as one of many theories seeking to explain the rapid development of human cognition, the consistency of sky-based myths, the advanced nature of early structures, and the anomalies in genetic data. It does not contradict the evidence of human evolution, but adds another layer, suggesting that evolution might have blended with influence from settlers who arrived from Nibiru. Some researchers argue that considering external influence expands understanding rather than diminishes it. If early humans blended with settlers, the timeline of development changes. The settlers' advanced traits could accelerate cognitive evolution, shaping the emergence of complex societies. Their knowledge could provide foundations for astronomy, agriculture, and engineering. Their memories, preserved through stories, could become the myths that continue to fascinate humanity today. Skeptics counter that such theories require extraordinary evidence. They emphasize the importance of grounding interpretations in measurable data. Their caution is essential, ensuring that theories remain anchored in observable patterns. Yet even skeptics acknowledge the gaps, the questions without easy answers, and the anomalies that resist simple explanation. Their work keeps the conversation balanced, allowing curiosity to thrive without overwhelming evidence-based inquiry. Between these perspectives exists the silence, a quiet space where neither science nor myth offers complete clarity. This silence is not empty. It holds the weight of unanswered questions, the fragments of forgotten history, and the echoes of memories shaped by millennia. It invites exploration without demanding resolution. It allows theories to coexist, offering room for new discoveries and interpretations. Within this silence, humanity continues to search. New technologies reveal details previously hidden. Genetic studies uncover deeper layers of heritage. Archaeological findings push timelines further back. Astronomical observations expand understanding of distant worlds. Each discovery contributes to a broader picture of humanity's past, revealing complexity that extends beyond simple origin stories. As these pieces accumulate, the question of whether humanity could be an imported species becomes one part of a larger exploration. It is neither dismissed nor confirmed. It remains open, shaped by evidence, memory, and possibility. It reflects humanity's ongoing attempt to understand where it came from and how it became what it is today. This space, where myth and measurement meet without closing around a single conclusion, carries into the next part of the story, where the search for origins becomes part of humanity's identity, shaping how civilizations look upward as they move toward the future. If humanity's earliest ancestors were carried to Earth by settlers from Nibiru, the implications extend far beyond mythology, archaeology, or even biology. They reshape the structure of everything people believe about themselves. Origins form the foundation of identity. Cultures build laws, rituals, and ideas upon stories of where they came from. Histories form around migrations, innovations, and discoveries. If the human story includes a journey across space rather than a single birthplace on Earth, it alters not only the distant past, but the way humanity understands itself in the present. It adds layers to memory, meaning, and connection that extend beyond the boundaries of this planet. To explore these implications, it helps to picture how the settlers viewed Earth when they first arrived. They would not see it as an unfamiliar sphere floating in the void. They would see it as a destination chosen out of necessity, hope, and long-term planning. Their arrival was not dramatic, even if stories later transformed it into light, thunder, or divine descent. It was a quiet crossing shaped by survival. If their journey included families, children, elders, and leaders, they would carry meaning with them. That meaning would blend with the environment they encountered here. Over time, the blend would become the root of what humanity later called culture. If humans originated on Nibiru, then Earth became more than a home. It became a continuation of a story interrupted by the cycles of a distant world. The settlers did not abandon their identity when they landed. They brought language, memory, values, and skills. These elements shaped early communities and influenced how the first families adapted to their new environment. Everything Earth's early societies built, from farming practices to shelter design, reflected this mixture of inherited knowledge and new observation. Even when Earth's environment demanded different methods, the foundation remained shaped by the settlers' past. Over generations, this past transformed, not through deliberate rewriting, but through the natural shift that occurs when knowledge meets time. Stories adapted to suit the experiences of each generation. Lessons preserved under one meaning became rituals under another. Technical concepts lost precision and became symbolic. The children of settlers taught their children, and those children taught the next. As centuries passed, memory softened but never disappeared. If humanity came from another world, then its earliest ideas about meaning, purpose, and belonging grew out of this transition. One immediate implication of this origin is that human adaptability becomes more than an evolutionary trait shaped by Earth alone. It becomes a reflection of a people forged by a planet with extreme cycles. If Nibiru's long orbit required planning across centuries, its people would develop resilience, problem-solving, and cooperation. These traits, inherited by their descendants, would shape the structure of human society on Earth. Early humans built communities that valued teaching, memory, and shared responsibility. They organized tasks such as farming, building, and hunting efficiently. They created rituals that reinforced social bonds. This organizational ability helped early humans advance rapidly. It explains why some of the earliest settlements show signs of cooperation and planning that exceed what Earth's environment alone would demand. A society that inherited traits shaped by Nibiru's challenges would naturally build its life around long-term stability. Even when written records didn't exist, families preserved knowledge through storytelling, craft, and observation. This continuity helped early humans navigate Earth's dynamic climate, shifting landscapes, and diverse ecosystems. Another implication relates to humanity's connection to the sky. If humans descended from settlers who once used astronomical information to guide survival, then the strong human instinct to look upward carries deeper meaning. Across Earth, cultures built structures aligned with celestial events. They created calendars that tracked seasons with precision. They associated meaning with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. Even when the original purpose faded, the practice remained. If humans inherited the habit of reading the sky, then this habit influenced the development of early science, architecture, and spirituality. This connection also helps explain why celestial symbolism appears repeatedly in early art and mythology. Sun disks, star patterns, spirals representing orbits, and symbols of light descending from above show up in cultures separated by geography and time. These symbols persisted because they resonated with inherited memory. Even when new generations interpreted them according to Earth's environment, the underlying instinct remained. The sky mattered not only spiritually but practically. If humans were carried here, another implication emerges in the structure of early belief systems. Cultures often described beings from the sky who shaped humanity. These beings provided knowledge, guidance, or protection. They appeared in stories as ancestors, gods, or teachers. If these stories reflect inherited memory, then humanity's earlier spiritual beliefs grew out of real interactions interpreted through cultural shifts. Over centuries, these stories became mythology, but they still shaped identity, behaviour, and purpose. Even in modern societies, symbols connected to the sky influence art, religion, and philosophy. They form part of the cultural fabric. A skyborn origin also affects the understanding of human diversity. If early settlers intermingled with existing life forms or multiple migrating groups before memory faded, the blending of traits could explain the rapid emergence of diverse physical and cultural expressions. Human populations differ widely in skin tone, bone structure, metabolic adaptation, and genetic markers. Some traits align with environmental pressures, others appear quickly or remain puzzling. A blend of Nibiruan and Earth-based ancestry could create such variety, especially over long periods of migration and settlement. This does not diminish the significance of Earth's role. Earth shaped humanity profoundly. Its climate, landscapes, bacteria, plants, and animals influenced every stage of human development. Adaptation to Earth's environment created new traits and behaviours that blended with inherited ones. If humans arrived from Nibiru, Earth became a second parent, influencing growth, learning, and culture. Human identity would be rooted in both worlds, shaped by the extremes of a distant planet and the diversity of this one. Another implication concerns human curiosity. Humans display persistent drive to explore, investigate, and seek meaning. This drive extends beyond survival. It appears in art, science, storytelling, and innovation. If early settlers crossed space out of necessity, curiosity would be one of the traits that helped them survive long cycles. Planning for future challenges requires imagination. Understanding orbital patterns requires observation and interpretation. Teaching children to navigate a world shaped by extremes requires storytelling. These traits would be passed down, shaping how humanity approaches unknowns. Curiosity becomes not just a trait of Earth, but of ancestry. This curiosity influenced how humans approached time. Human cultures developed calendars, rituals marking seasons, and ways to measure cycles. They tracked days and nights, months and years. They recorded major events and preserved them through writing, carving, or oral tradition. If Nibiru demanded awareness of long cycles, its settlers carried that awareness into their new life. Even when the cycles changed, the instinct to measure time remained. Earth's faster cycles introduced new rhythms, but the habit of measuring, predicting, and preparing persisted. The possibility of being an imported species also influences how humans interpret progress. If early humans inherited advanced knowledge from settlers, this would explain why certain skills appeared earlier than expected. Techniques such as metalworking, agriculture, and complex building might not have developed from scratch. Instead, they might reflect adapted teachings brought by settlers. Over time, these techniques evolved with Earth's resources and conditions. This blending created civilizations capable of rapid growth. Understanding this perspective does not diminish the accomplishments of early humans. Instead, it emphasizes continuity. The settlers' knowledge provided a foundation. Earth's challenges provided opportunity. Human creativity filled the spaces between. This combination shaped civilizations that built monumental structures, developed writing, crafted intricate tools, and created complex social systems. Another implication concerns memory itself. Stories of origins were not mere entertainment for early societies. They served as teaching tools, linking generations to the past. If humans came from Nibiru, these stories carried the weight of ancestral identity. Families taught their children about where they came from because it shaped who they believed they were. Even when technical details faded, the emotional significance remained strong enough to persist through millennia. Understanding memory as an inheritance from another world enriches the meaning of myth rather than reducing it. One of the most significant implications lies in the nature of human purpose. If humanity began on Nibiru, the idea of purpose becomes intertwined with survival across worlds. The settlers travelled far not because of conquest or curiosity alone, but because they needed continuity. Their survival depended on establishing life on a new world. If humanity is part of their legacy, then every human carries a fragment of that purpose. This does not impose a specific destiny. It simply means that the story of survival, adaptation and resilience is embedded deeply within human identity. This perspective also reframes how humans view their relationship with Earth. If Earth became a home chosen out of necessity, then humanity's role changes from ownership to stewardship. Earth provided stability, resources, and opportunity. Humanity adapted to its rhythms and shaped its landscapes. Yet the settlers did not arrive to dominate the world. They arrived to survive. Their descendants inherited this relationship, even if they forgot its origin. Understanding Earth as a refuge rather than an origin encourages a sense of responsibility. It frames humanity as a caretaker of a world that offered sanctuary. Another implication lies in how humans interpret their place in the universe. If humanity originated elsewhere, then Earth is part of a larger story. Humans become a species shaped by more than one world. The urge to explore space, to understand planetary systems, and to search for other forms of life might reflect inherited instinct. The settlers travelled across space out of necessity. Their descendants retain the capacity to wonder what lies beyond their horizon. This wonder influences exploration, innovation, and the development of technologies designed to peer into distant realms. Understanding humanity as an imported species also affects views of the future. If the settlers once travelled between worlds, humanity might inherit both the capacity and the drive to do the same. Over time, exploring or settling new worlds becomes not a leap into the unknown, but a continuation of a story that began long before recorded history. This does not imply a predetermined path. It simply expands the context within which humanity understands its capabilities. Culture reflects this expanded context. Art often depicts journeys, transformations, and realms beyond Earth. Music captures feelings of longing, searching, or belonging. Literature explores themes of identity, origin, and destiny. Science fiction often imagines humanity travelling between worlds or encountering beings from other realms. These themes reflect deep-rooted instincts that may trace back to the settlers' earlier stories. Seeing humanity as a species carried here through the efforts of ancestors from Nibiru also reframes the meaning of connection. Humans across the world share common ancestry, even if their cultures diverged over time. This shared ancestry becomes more profound if it includes origins on another world. Differences in appearance, language, or tradition become variations of a blended heritage shaped by adaptation. Recognizing this shared story encourages unity and understanding, grounded in the idea that everyone descends from the same ancient journey. This perspective also reshapes how humans interpret mystery. Instead of viewing gaps in history as failures of knowledge, they become reminders of a story shaped by both Earth and another world. These gaps invite curiosity rather than frustration. They reflect the natural process of memory fading over time. Understanding humanity as a species with a dual origin encourages patience and openness as humans seek to understand their past. The implications of being carried here reach into every corner of human understanding. from science to culture to identity. They do not replace existing knowledge. They expand its context. They offer a lens through which the patterns of history, myth, and biology take on deeper meaning. They suggest that humanity's story includes both the soil beneath its feet and the stars above. These implications move naturally into the final part, where the connection between Earth and the memory of a wandering planet shapes how humanity sees itself, and what traces of that ancient journey continue to guide its imagination, rituals, and sense of belonging. The idea that humanity began on a wandering world far from Earth does not disappear easily once it is considered. It settles into the mind quietly, not as an answer, but as a presence. It lingers in the patterns of stories told across generations, in the way people shape their rituals, in the way they mark their seasons, and in the way they look upward even when they no longer know why. A quiet thread winds through all of this. It does not draw attention to itself. It does not replace the stories cultures built or the discoveries science revealed. It simply runs through them, connecting pieces that emerged at different times and in different places, tying together memory and instinct in ways that shape how humanity moves through the world. This thread appears first in the earliest traces of human expression. When the settlers from Nibiru made Earth their home, their descendants learned to build, adapt, and thrive. In the earliest rock carvings and simple markings left on cave walls, there are shapes that repeat. Circles and spirals, lines radiating outward, arcs intersecting at angles that reflect attention to patterns in the sky. These symbols have been found in regions separated by oceans and continents. They appear in the markings of early groups who never met. Over time, these symbols grew more complex. They became part of larger designs, incorporated into pottery, woven into textiles, carved into stone. They became pieces of identity, but at their core remained reflections of cycles and movement. These shapes suggest a memory of a world where cycles stretched far beyond Earth's steady rhythms. This thread also appears in humanity's instinct to create pathways, both literal and symbolic. Migrating groups carried their knowledge with them as they crossed landscapes. They followed rivers, coastlines, and stars. They left markers along the way, sometimes simple piles of stones, sometimes more elaborate signs carved into rock faces. These markers show deliberate placement, often aligned with natural features or celestial points. They reflect the settler's instinct for navigation, inherited through generations. On Nibiru, navigation meant survival. It required watching the sky, tracking changes across long stretches of time, and understanding how movement shaped the environment. That instinct persisted. It influenced how humans crossed mountains, deserts, and seas. Even as people adapted to Earth's quicker cycles, the quiet thread of inherited navigation remained woven into their choices. Architecture carries this thread in physical form. Early structures built by the descendants of settlers often reflect both utility and memory. They incorporate elements that serve practical needs while also pointing upward. Even simple shelters built from wood and earth often feature openings aligned with sunlight or moonlight. As societies grew more advanced, these openings became more precise. Temples, towers, and ceremonial buildings across the world align with specific celestial events. These alignments are too consistent to be accidental. They reflect not only observation, but a need to preserve orientation. Early humans did not view the sky as decoration. They saw it as a guide and a reminder. The settlers who arrived from Nibiru once depended on celestial understanding. Their descendants preserved that habit, even when its original purpose faded, turning it into ritual, ceremony, and cultural tradition. Music carries the thread in a different way. Long before instruments were refined, early humans created rhythms that matched the patterns of natural cycles. The beating of hands on drums, the repetition of chants, the rising and falling tones of simple flutes all reflect a sense of movement that feels older than Earth itself. As cultures evolved, music became more complex. Scales developed, harmonies emerged, Instruments grew in number and variety, yet the underlying rhythms often reflect cycles of breath, heartbeats, and seasonal patterns. These rhythms are universal. Cultures that never communicated share musical structures that align with one another. This universality suggests something inherited, an instinct shaped by long cycles experienced by ancestors crossing a distant world. Storytelling carries the thread most clearly. The settlers from Nibiru brought with them memories that shaped how they taught their children. These stories, originally grounded in real experiences, shifted over time as descendants adapted them to Earth. The original context faded, replaced by symbols and metaphors that fit new environments. Yet the structure of the stories remained remarkably consistent across cultures. They often begin with a world in darkness, followed by the arrival of light or knowledge. They describe beings who arrive from above, bringing skills or guidance. They speak of cycles that govern existence, transitions that reshape the world, and journeys that define identity. These stories, though framed differently in each culture, echo one another across time. They reflect a shared memory that did not fade completely, even as centuries passed. Language carries the thread through its structure. Patterns in human languages show similarities that reach across continents. Certain root sounds appear repeatedly. Concepts relating to the sky, cycles, and origins share similarities even among distant cultures. While languages evolve quickly, these common elements suggest a foundation older than any written record. They reflect how the settlers taught their children, how families communicated during the early days on Earth, and how memory shaped the way stories were told. Even when languages diverged completely, these deeper patterns remained embedded in the way humans express meaning, identity, and time. Human behaviour also carries the thread. People build monuments to mark significant events. They create rituals to honour transitions between seasons, life stages, and historical moments. These rituals often incorporate movement toward the sky, light, smoke rising upward, or symbols representing ascent. They reflect a desire to maintain a connection with something beyond Earth. Even when spiritual beliefs differ, the instinct remains similar. It emerges in ceremonies held at dawn or dusk, in festivals marking solstices, and in gatherings where people share stories about creation and destiny. These rituals do not appear randomly. They reflect inherited patterns shaped by ancestors who once depended on such cycles for survival. Human creativity continues the thread in ways that stretch across eras. Sculptures, paintings, and carvings depict connections between Earth and the sky. Some show figures descending from above, others portray humans reaching upward. Architectural motifs incorporate symbols of movement, light, and cycles. Even in modern art, themes of space, travel, and transformation appear repeatedly. These themes reflect not only imagination but memory. They echo ideas that shaped humanity's earlier stories, preserved in ways that transcend language or geography. The thread also appears in the way humanity approaches knowledge. Across civilizations, people developed systems to understand the world. They measured time, tracked celestial movements, recorded weather patterns, and studied the behavior of animals and plants. These systems reflect an advanced awareness of cycles. They often incorporate long-term observations that extend beyond what early communities required for basic survival. This attention to detail suggests inherited practices. If the settlers from Nibiru needed to track long cycles to survive, they would pass these habits to their descendants. Even when Earth's quicker cycles became the norm, the instinct to measure, observe, and predict persisted. When written records emerged, they captured pieces of the thread more clearly. Ancient texts describe beings who travelled between realms. They record stories of visitors from the sky who shaped early societies. They outline genealogies connecting leaders to celestial origins. These records appear in cultures separated by distance and time, suggesting a shared memory that extended beyond a single region. Scholars interpret these texts symbolically, focusing on metaphor and cultural function. Yet beneath the symbolism lies a pattern that feels older than Earth's earlier civilizations. The persistence of sky-based origin stories reflects more than imagination. It reflects a memory shaped by the settlers' arrival, softened through generations but not erased. As civilizations grew more complex, the thread remained, even if people no longer recognized it. Astronomers mapped stars with increasing precision. Architects aligned structures with solstices and equinoxes. Poets described journeys through the sky. Philosophers debated humanity's place in the cosmos. Explorers crossed oceans guided by star paths. Navigators followed celestial markers passed down through oral tradition. All of these practices, though shaped by Earth, reflect instincts inherited long before writing began. Even in modern times, when technology offers explanations grounded in physics and biology, the thread remains visible. People build observatories to study distant stars. Space agencies send probes to explore planets and moons. Scientists search for signs of life beyond Earth. Writers imagine civilizations traveling between stars. Filmmakers create stories about origins in distant realms. Artists paint visions of cosmic landscapes. Musicians compose pieces inspired by the universe. These expressions reflect curiosity, but they also reflect instinct, an inherited pull toward the sky. The thread appears in small gestures as well. People step outside at night and look upward without thinking. They mark special moments by watching the sunrise or sunset. They gather to observe eclipses. They feel something when they see a meteor streak across the sky. These reactions are not taught. They are felt. They emerge from a place deeper than conscious memory, from instinct shaped long before the first cities rose or the first stories were carved into clay. Recognizing this thread does not diminish the achievements of human civilization. It enriches them. It shows that humanity grew not from a single place, but from a journey that spans worlds. It reflects a lineage shaped by challenges faced on a distant planet and by the opportunities offered by Earth. Understanding this thread encourages a view of humanity not as isolated or accidental, but as part of a wider story that extends beyond a single world. This perspective highlights the connection between memory and identity. Even when details fade, memory persists in patterns, behaviors, and instincts. The settlers from Nibiru might not have intended for their story to transform into myth. They simply taught their children what they needed to know. When those children grew up in a different environment, they adapted that knowledge. As generations passed, the original meaning softened, yet the stories survived. They grew into symbols, rituals, and beliefs that shaped entire cultures. This thread also influences how humanity imagines the future. If humans came from another world, then the idea of returning to the stars becomes more than aspiration. It becomes a continuation of a journey that began long ago. Space exploration reflects more than scientific curiosity. It reflects inherited instinct. It reflects the legacy of ancestors who crossed the void not with rockets, but with determination, planning, and necessity. Their descendants, shaped by Earth but still connected to that legacy, feel the pull of the sky. When scientists explore planets, moons, and distant stars, they follow the same thread. They seek understanding of origins, possibilities, and connections. Their work builds on questions that began before the first civilizations. These questions do not arise from a place of uncertainty alone. They arise from identity. They reflect a quiet awareness that humanity's story is part of a larger tapestry woven across space and time. The thread even influences how humanity approaches meaning. People seek purpose not only in daily life, but in a broader context. They ask where they came from and where they're going. They look for connections between past, present, and future. These impulses shape science, art, philosophy, and spirituality. They reflect the settlers' legacy of endurance, curiosity, and reflection. Even if people do not consciously recognize this inheritance, it shapes their search for meaning. Across generations, the thread remains quiet but steady. It runs through ancient carvings, early temples, complex myths, scientific inquiry, and modern imagination. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, guiding humanity gently through its understanding of the world. It suggests that origins are not confined to a single place. They stretch across landscapes, time periods, and planetary boundaries. This quiet thread does not end. It leads onward, connecting what humanity remembers to what it still seeks, carrying the story into whatever comes next.